You always see the very pro-vaccine people show the vaccines are the best thing ever and never cause an issue. And then the people that are air quotes anti-vax, their studies show that vaccines cause all sorts of problems. And I think that's because it's epidemiology and it's malleable and you can show things how you want to show them. And the only way to actually get a real answer is to follow prospectively and do the best kind of trials. And until we do that, I don't know what the best answer is. So that's where you have to go with parental choice and kind of informed consent and doing what you feel like is best. And lots of people in my practice do a slow schedule. I mean, I guess, for people that don't know me, I believe in informed consent. I don't believe in forcing people to do things. I'm not against vaccines at all.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or shall I say the big baby in the womb. Providers love to throw around this phrase, big baby. We think you're gonna have a big baby. Wow, this is a big baby in there. We should schedule your induction because this is a big baby. And you know what? Honestly, it's a great sales tactic because it works. It freaks you out. You start thinking, oh my God, what if this baby's huge? How am I going to ever push a big baby out? But here's the truth. A suspected big baby is actually one of the worst predictors in maternity care. If we actually break down the numbers, only 1% of babies in the U.S. are actually 9 pounds and 15 ounces, which constitutes a big baby, which means the rest of the 99% of babies that are born in the U.S. are below 915, which means they don't actually meet the criteria for a big baby. So why are you told so much about a big baby? Well, partly because money, like everything, and partly because scheduling an induction or a C-section is easier for the hospital system. And then partly, yes, we're going thirds here, your OBGYN is probably afraid of a big baby. You want another piece of data that may drop your jaw to the absolute floor? The biggest predictor of whether you are able to push out a big baby or not is actually your provider's belief in your ability to do so. Yeah, so the doctor you choose, they're quite important. You want a doctor that is not scared of a big baby, rather knows how to facilitate the birth of a big baby. But what if you don't have that? What if you can't change providers? What if you are too late to maybe go to a different hospital? What if you just don't want to? Then what? Well, lucky for you, I've been working on a brand new course that I'm calling Pushing Out Your Big Ass Baby. And it's going to bust through all the myths, lay out all the real evidence, link all the data for you, and hand you the exact advocacy tools that you need to shut down the scare tactics with confidence. Right now, we are in a pre-sale phase, which means you are getting a pre-sale price. If you have been worried about hearing the words big baby, if your provider has been scaring you about having a big baby, or you're just concerned that you may not know what to do if you run into this in the end of pregnancy, and you're looking for tangible tips to overcome the fear-based rhetoric and actually have the birth of your dreams no matter how much your baby weighs at birth, then this course is for you. I'm going to be defining exactly what microsomia is, whether or not induction and C-section are evidence-based for a quote-unquote big baby, how movement in labor and birth positions make all the difference, the actual risks that are involved, because nothing is risk-free. Plus, we're going to talk about some complications that may arise and how you can handle those. And then finally, I'm going to teach you how to advocate for yourself so that you do not get pressured into a birth situation that you absolutely do not want. Head to thebirthlounge.com/bigbaby to get your hands on this brand new course today. Do not wait. The price goes up on November 1st, so get in right now in this pre-sale period so you can take advantage of that pre-sale price. I cannot wait to help you have an empowered birth and push out your big ass baby. Again, that is thebirthlounge.com/bigbaby. See you there. All right, on to today's episode. Just when you thought that we were wrapping up our vaccine exploration series, I hit you with an uppercut. So today's episode is one final episode with a guest who has actually already been on the show. If you listen to episode 318 with Dr. Joel Gator, who is a pediatrician, we actually talked about in that episode screen time for your children. And within that episode, we briefly talked about vaccines, but very surface level. And a lot of you wrote in and you wished that we had dove deeper into vaccines, which then pushed me to do the vaccine exploration series, which then prompted Dr. Gator to reach out to us and say, hey, do you want to do an episode about kind of debriefing your vaccine exploration series? And I thought, heck yeah, let's do it. And so not only is today a really fun episode because it is unlike any other episode that we've done, we're kind of reviewing a series of the episode. He and I have a lot of really great banter about vaccine topics that you're really not going to find anywhere else. And I pressed Dr. Gator on some of your most pressing questions. And you know what? He is so transparent with all of his answers. I think one of my favorite things about Dr. Gator is that he truly doesn't have any judgment. He genuinely does not care what you choose for your family. What he does care about, though, is that you feel informed and you feel confident and that you are being supported in a way that truly feels aligned with you and your family. And I think that's pretty self-explanatory about why he and I are so aligned on so many things. Now, obviously, there have been many headlines recently about the changes being made within the CDC and to the vaccine schedule and by ACIP, which is the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. And if you're like me, you probably feel a bit overwhelmed with all of the information that is circulating, from online sources to social media to articles being shared and group messages to the news broadcasts that you watch in the evenings or early in the mornings. Now today, Dr. Gator and I are going to dive into a bunch of those headlines. We're going to talk about why there aren't vaccinated versus unvaccinated trials when it comes to vaccine testing. We're also going to talk about how concerned parents should be with the amount of aluminum and adjuvants in vaccines. Obviously, this leads us to the topic of public trust and how that trust has been eroded between the healthcare system and parents in the recent years, and what it genuinely means to have informed consent when it comes to your vaccination choice. A couple of other things that I talked to him about is how do we, as consumers and as parents, navigate the decision around being seen by a pediatrician who does see unvaccinated children as well? Because we know those camps are quite opposite and they have a lot of strong feelings, and there's a lot of people in both camps. I hear you if you are someone who says, I absolutely do not want to take my child to a pediatrician. that sees unvaccinated kids. And then I also hear you very much if you are someone who is struggling to find a pediatrician to give you care. And then obviously that brings up the questions about ethics and morals and legality, question mark. Can a pediatrician actually fire you for not following the CDC recommended schedule? Because that's all it is. It's a recommendation. They're not mandates. They aren't the law. So how does all of that work? And then if you are fired by your pediatrician, what's the ethics behind that? Where do those families go to get care? And then finally, to wrap up the episode, because we're headed into sixth season, I did want to get Dr. Gator's opinion on the RSV vaccine. And I wanted to ask what parents needed to know when making that decision for their family, pros, cons, alternatives, and how do you truly keep your child the safest when it comes to entering RSV season. If you want to hear Dr. Gator's full bio, you can find that in the show notes, or you can scroll back to episode 318 and listen there. But I really am so eager to dive into this episode because it's so good. And the chats that we have are, like I say, they're like nothing else you're going to find anywhere else, because he and I are not afraid to go there on topics. We're not afraid to have this respectful conversation. And we certainly aren't afraid to address the questions that so many other people seem fearful to talk about. So that's exactly what you're going to hear today. So without further ado, Dr. Joel, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back on.
Absolutely. You are such a good guest for the show. And I obviously love your Instagram. And I got to be honest, you were kind of that pivotal person that kicked off our latest vaccine series. And it's because I had you on actually to talk about screen time, but we did talk a little bit about vaccines, just briefly mentioned it. It was in passing, and I had so many people reach out and say, wait, we want to hear more about vaccines. Wait, we want to hear more about this. Oh, I wish you guys had dove deeper into that. I wish you had discussed this more. And I thought, okay, how am I going to do this and keep things neutral and try and have people from both sides? So I wanted to have representation of pediatricians that honored parent autonomy and freedom of choice. And I thought it was really important too to have on someone that was representative of the AAP. And I wanted to talk with people who weren't necessarily MDs as well, because we know a lot of families are getting care from nurse practitioners and people who are not necessarily physicians themselves. And so it took me a couple of months to be able to put that series together. And so I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on the series, and let's kind of hash through some of the things that came up for you when you were listening to the series.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was great. And, I think it's so interesting just even in mentioning that, because we talked, I don't know, it wasn't that many months ago, maybe like in, I think, the early beginning of the year. And even at that time, things were very different than they are now. And was decreasing at that time, but still around. And I don't really feel like there's a lot of censorship around vaccines anymore, which is good. And since my book came out and I started talking about vaccines, I mean, I've been doing a lot of talking about vaccines on a lot of different podcasts. And so it's been really interesting to see how excited people are to talk about it and how positively people have taken it, because there were just so many questions about vaccines. We can never talk about it. And now we can. And given that I always have to talk about like all the time, like every day I'm doing podcasts or the news or whatever it is. And so I try to keep up with all the things that people are talking about when it comes to vaccines. And I try to listen to as many podcasts and things about vaccines. And I always try to get the different perspectives. And when I was just doing a Spotify search, I saw like some of your episodes came up with the word, and I was like, oh, this is great. And so I listened to them and I thought it was great. And you really were quite unbiased, which was fantastic. And you went to, kind of both ends, which I think is important. That's what I tried to do with my book. And I think you kind of did that in a podcast form. So I thought it was great. And I figured, and that's why I reached out to you again. I was like, oh, I heard you talking about this. Do you want to do another episode now that it's done? Because I'm curious, like what questions you have, or I'm sure there's like just a lot of things we can chat about that. But that's kind of how this evolved, because I just thought like, oh, well, let's we didn't talk about it even, it was just a few months ago, and this was like what I was talking about. So I feel like it's a good time to get into it now.
Well, honestly, it's because I was scared. I spent a long time really avoiding this topic because It is so volatile. People have such big feelings, and I don't like to be the target of those big feelings. And I also feel like vaccines are not necessarily my wheelhouse. I like to really operate in this space of being able to provide people with resources. So, humans to go to, websites to go to, books and podcasts to go to, not necessarily providing the information myself. And so, I had a lot of like personal growth that I had to do before I was ready to take that series on. And so that's kind of where the hesitation came from. And I talked about it in the series of like it is a big honor to be able to hold this space for people, and I really did genuinely try and keep it really unbiased and neutral. So it feels very validating and just like a big honor to hear you say that I did a fairly good job at that, because that was the goal. I did have a
Same
lot of
thing.
questions. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
no, go for it.
and it's not, I think it's like really interesting if you kind of step back, right? You think generally for a podcast, the host is not the expert, right? And so like generally for the topics you're talking about, you are bringing on people that don't know. So the fact that same for me, like I just didn't talk about vaccines, forever until recently. And so it's weird to think that there would be a topic that people would be interested in, so interested in that you would be like, and this isn't weird because this is just how it is, but I'm just saying like, it's weird that we would be in this place where you would be like, I don't know if I want to do a topic. It's too censored. Like, but that's where we were.
Hmm.
And I think that's just interesting to think about because there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to talk about it. You're not the expert probably on many things that you talk about, yet those are things you bring on because that's what you bring the person on, like they're the expert. So it's really cool to kind of be on the other end of this now, I think, and having people talk about. And I'm curious before we get into like the topics, like how did people respond to it? Did you get a lot of hate? Because I thought I was going to get so much hate with the book and so much, and I haven't gotten almost any, which has been very
Yeah.
surprising. So I'm curious, like, was it similar for your audience?
It was. I think there were some topics that I got a lot of pushback. So, in all honesty, our biggest episode was the vitamin K episode. I did not see that coming. I was very shocked about that. I thought that our episode with the pediatrician that represents the AAP would be a lot larger than it was. I thought that the episode that talked specifically about Tylenol use and autism with a clinical pharmacist would also be a lot larger, and it wasn't. And then I thought that the episode with the pediatrician that was vaccine neutral, and he is out of Florida, so he allows parents to kind of make their own schedule, and he's really into autonomy, Dr. Thornburg, I thought that one would blow up like wildfire, and it was just like mediocre.
Well,
I
maybe because
just,
it's a birth podcast. I guess that's kind of the behind, like behind what it's
yeah.
become. And so vitamin K is so relevant, I think, to a lot of people probably listening. So that makes sense. But I thought the most interesting conversation was with Dr. Patel because you were
Me
you were
too.
pretty you were very reasonable with him, but you pushed back, but not super hard, which I mean you probably just didn't want to, but which is totally reasonable. But like I was so shocked what I was actually surprised. I mean, I'm not surprised because I'm surprised by nothing, but I was super shocked when he was saying that he thought it was unethical to do a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. And I was like, do really a lot of doctors think that? Like, I don't understand why in any way you would think that's unethical. Like there's no logic to that. A randomized would be maybe
Yeah.
you can see where that would be unethical, but something that's open label that you could choose which group you're in, like how could that be unethical? And I wish you had asked him more about it. I know why you didn't push him. It's fine, but I mean I'm very curious like why he actually thinks that's unethical because he didn't really say. He just kind of said, but like I don't. I thought that's a weird response.
Yeah, so in all honesty, that is probably the number one sentence that stuck out to me in the whole entire vaccine series that I did, is that he was really like staunchly against that. And I can't remember if he had a conversation in one of my comment sections or if he and I had a conversation afterwards, but what I gathered, and I'm not speaking for him, so everyone, if you want to hear it straight from Dr. Patel, he's a really kind guy. He's always in his DM, so like please address him. Like he'll definitely talk back to you. But what I gathered from his side was that withholding a vaccine from a group of people is the unethical part. And I think where he and I disconnected, or we're disconnected, where you and I are very connected on this, is that both sides would have the knowledge of what they were getting, right? It's not a blind placebo. That's not what we're doing here. You would either, and my argument is that there are already hundreds of thousands of families that choose to not be vaccinated. So let's bring them into a study. They are voluntarily not being vaccinated, and they reserve the right at any time during that study to either pull out of the study or to become vaccinated, and then we would just remove them from that group. And the same can be said for the vaccinated. Let's take a group of people who are voluntarily vaccinating their children according to the schedule, and at any point they reserve the right to also pull out of the study or stop vaccinating, which we would then remove them, right? And so I think for me, that's more of my setup when I think about looking at a vaccinated versus unvaccinated group of children. Is it's not withholding. They still have access to either vaccinations or to stop vaccinating because it's voluntary. And I think he and I just were not able to connect on that point specifically.
And that's what I mean, if I was talking to him, that's what I want to press on more, because I have a lot of respect for him. I think he's great. I think he's a wonderful speaker, a wonderful
Yeah.
communicator, super. I mean, I've never met him, but seems like a super nice guy and like does a great job in general.
Yeah.
And so he said that, and maybe there's something I don't know, and that's why I would love to, because I just don't get it. Like, I don't see why it would be unethical to allow people to make their choice and to follow them forward. And in my book, I mean, that's literally what I thought we should be doing. Like, that's kind of in the last part of the book when I think like, what should we be doing next? I think we need prospective trials. That's what we need, and I think we need a lot of them. I think we've had a good chunk of epidemiology and retrospective studies. Not enough. I mean, we certainly haven't done the vaccinated, unvaccinated that I think we need to do. But ultimately, regardless of any of that, epidemiology is so malleable based on your preconceived notions, and you can adjust the studies to find what you're looking for.
Yes.
And especially when it comes to vaccines, I think that there's certainly one part of the research that is you find something that's not so great about vaccines and that person gets destroyed and they lose their career, so they just don't want to do it anymore. There's another part of it where someone who's like the head of CDC vaccine safety is like, oh, I found this thing with vaccines. Oh, well, here's what must be wrong. Let's adjust that. Okay, now we adjusted it. Now there's no signal. Great. So there's no risk for vaccines. Where adjusting in epidemiology is correct, but you can also adjust incorrectly to get rid of the signal that should be there. And so I just think that there's enough confusion, enough concern around vaccines, and we're doing this so frequently for our kids, and we're having this massive debate that it is just time that we have 10 prospective studies all over the world, vaccinated versus unvaccinated. Like, that's what I think we need to do. And so I would be curious as to why he thinks that's unethical. I know that it's not as good as a randomized trial, but it's as good as we're going to be able to do.
Correct.
But I don't see why it's unethical. If anything, you'd be giving people more education around vaccines if they were in a study, and they would be able to choose which group they're in, and they could always get them if they wanted to, and they can always drop out. But you just be following a big group of people forward for 5 or 10 or 15 years and just see what they do. And ultimately, what you'd come away with is the unvaccinated lifestyle versus the vaccinated lifestyle, and you won't necessarily be able to know exactly. But either way, in my mind, if the unvaccinated kids in general are healthier at the end of that study and at the end of 10 studies, then the question is, okay, why is the unvaccinated child and their lifestyle giving them lower rates of chronic disease? Like, that is the question. And it may not be vaccines. It could be the food they're eating, it could be the way that they're living, the toxins they're exposed to, it could be many other things. But once we can establish that those kids are healthier, then the question would be, okay, why? And if you do 10 studies like that, and the groups are exactly the same, and they have the same rates of autism and the same rates of chronic disease, that is the exact research that's going to make parents very comfortable to actually go and get vaccines. And it's going to be the evidence that doctors would actually really want to be able to point to say, look, we took it to heart. We understand that people are concerned. We understand that people are worried about autism. They're worried about chronic disease. So we're running a whole bunch of studies. We're spending millions and billions of dollars. We're going to follow kids forward. We're going to have a lot better data in 10 years than we have now. And we're going to have much better answers than we have then. And people will be much more comfortable to do it at that point. And I think that would put a lot of the concerns to rest. But I just don't see that happening. And when you hear somebody as prominent and intelligent and really, at the top of the pediatrics of medicine saying that they feel like it's unethical to do that, then I think it's disheartening for a lot of parents. Like, well, then how are we ever going to get that kind of research if you can't even study it and just assume that they're safe? Why should we assume that something is safe? Like, we should study it, and we should always want to make it better, and we should always want to improve it. And right now, there's nothing that I see in the system that's pushing pharmaceutical companies to make their products better. And I don't want kids to be unprotected from disease if we can protect them, but I also don't want to cause harm if there is some harms there. And I think we would have better vaccines potentially if companies were forced to make them better. And there's nothing right now pushing them because you can't sue them, not really. And I would think if we were a little more humble, in 10 years we'd have better, safer vaccines than we had now, maybe newer technology, different technology. Maybe, you drink a vaccine like with some of them. Maybe you just drink a little thing and then you get your enough protection for 10 diseases and that's safer. I don't know. Maybe there's a skin patch you could put. Who knows what the future technology is, but we had a polio vaccine in the past, right? Oral. It was giving more people polio than it was helping. So we took it off the market, right? We made a better one. We had a whooping cough vaccine on the market that was causing or contributing that was thought to cause neurologic complications. They made a newer one, a better one, a safer one. Like we've done this before. Rotavirus was causing intussusception. They took it off the market, made a better one, right? Like this has happened, but a lot of this happened before. We haven't seen a lot of that, I would say, in the last 20 years. And I don't think there's a big push for innovation. I mean, I know they're working on stuff, but ultimately they don't have that push for safety. And I think that has to come from the doctors to say, not just assume that they're safe, but study it. And I think there's a lot of assumption on safety, which I don't think is actually backed by the research that's ever been done.
So it's so interesting to hear you say all of this. I'm just like nodding my head till my head falls off because I agree with so much of it. But it's like the only, and look, I know that our algorithm feeds us the things that are going to trigger us the most. Like I totally understand how all of that is set up. But the only argument that I have seen traditional mainstream medical professionals push is vaccines are safe. You should trust it. We have used it forever. There are clinical trials. We know it is safe. Look at this Swedish study. They found no rates of autism in Tylenol. And it's like, but when you look at those studies, most of them are not done with true placebos and or with truly unvaccinated children, right? They are against past versions of that same vaccine. So for me, that's incredibly flawed because it is saying like vaccine B is better than A. And it's like, yeah, of course, you would hope that as we move forward with technology and medical advancements, we're improving things. It would be a super problem if B was worse than A. And so for me, that doesn't give it too much weight. It just, I don't know. I really struggle with the mainstream narrative because it is very few mainstream providers are willing to have the conversation of validating parents in, yes, this is scary. Yes, there's a lot going on here. And yes, I do think that there should be more studies. There's so many of them who are like, well, the studies exist, so you should just sit down and be quiet and trust it. And I think that is really ruining the trust in so many families with the healthcare system.
Right. And I just think that I can only look at things from my perspective and what I've seen. And I was trained in a certain way, and that's the way that I thought. And you don't look into this until you are forced to. And I was forced to because I did integrative medicine and people asked me questions and I was in that space. And I was really forced to because if I decided to write a book, which I did during the pandemic, so I was so frustrated, I felt like I have to know as much as possible and be as accurate as possible because this is obviously the most contentious topic. And certainly if you think back to that time, like I'm doing this, I don't even know if I'm gonna have a career after I'm done with it. Like it's different
Yeah.
now, luckily, so we can talk about it, but it had to be accurate, it had to be airtight, couldn't be mistakes. And so I just didn't know most of the research. And a lot of what we're told and taught is not actually what the research shows or actually is. And the more that you listen to the, I don't know, the heroes of medicine or like the Plotkins and Dr. Edwards, and you hear them on the stand with Aaron Siri talking about vaccines and going back through it, you're like, a lot of what is said is we haven't seen any problem with this, so therefore it doesn't exist. But the reality when they talk about it is, but there isn't a study to actually study that thing. So you're saying that there isn't a problem without actually having the backing of the data that you're saying. So you're just assuming that it's safe because you haven't seen something that shows it's unsafe. And that is not a, the best way that we should be following this. It doesn't mean that it's unsafe, but it's just not completely honest or completely accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to see that data. And I don't want people to stop getting vaccines or get lots of diseases. I just want it to be as safe as possible. And I want to have discussions. And I'm totally fine being wrong about things. I'm totally fine to change what I think depending on what people. And that's why I just thought it was so interesting because I don't know why he thinks that way, and I would love to hear why he thinks it's unethical. But I also want to know why we don't have vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies. Like there's so much data out there. And you don't want to get conspiratorial, but it's like, why doesn't Kaiser take all their data from the last 20 years and be like, all right, let's look at the vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids? You're like, well, there are all these things that we have to deal with. Okay, so like figure out how to do the statistical analysis and do it like 15 different ways. I don't care. Get 10 different teams to look at it. Put in different confounders, show all that stuff. And let's see, like, okay, no confounders, here's what it shows. These things we're including, here's what it shows. How many visits they had, here's what it shows. It's like the same thing happens over and over again with the research, where there's this huge signal of concern around vaccines, and it's like, oh, well, you just have to adjust for how many visits they have, and then the whole thing goes away. And it's like, well, right, you do want to control for visits in some sense, because if somebody never gets seen, they can't have a diagnosis. But also there's a real possibility that kids that don't get something or don't get vaccines could just be healthier and not coming in more. And I don't know why, in a database where you have good data, like really good data, that you would assume that you wouldn't pick up things like cancer or asthma or allergies or autoimmune conditions. Like, those kids would still come to the doctor. So as long as they're still going to the doctor in general over that time period, I don't think an unvaccinated kid who has cancer is not going to come to the doctor. Like, they will get seen and picked up at some point. Yes, it's possible they'd go outside the system. Yes, it's possible they don't come in as much, but I just don't think that that's true. If you have an asthma exacerbation, you're going to the hospital. Like, I think that's going to happen. So I think that theory holds for like an ear infection, something more mild. Then yeah, the unvaccinated kids are just not as interested in modern medicine. They don't go in as much. They just don't take medicine. So probably, yeah, there's a lot of underreporting of an ear infection or just ear pain, and more people get diagnoses of ear infection because they're going to come in more and get the diagnosis. But I don't know if that holds for the more serious things. I don't know. I know what the answer is, but I don't think you couldn't study them. And I think that's anyways where the prospective trials come in, because you're then looking at kids, regardless of whether they come in, and you're saying, oh, do you have autism? Do you have ADHD? Do you have asthma? Have you been to the hospital? Like, these things can be picked up even if a kid never goes into the doctor. And that could be the difference of having the best kind of study that we actually need the information for. And that's what I want. I want to know. I don't know the answer. I don't know about autism. We hear, oh, it's all debunked, it's settled. It's not. Like, it's just not. Like, you look at research and it's just not. And that's a ridiculous thing to say when you look at it. And that's just what it is. We studied MMR, we studied thimerosal, we haven't studied all the vaccines. There's a lot of new vaccines. We haven't studied them together. Even the studies that we have, it's MMR versus no MMR in the setting of getting your other vaccines. That's not answering the question. That's not saying that vaccines do cause autism, but it's not answering the question of, if you are unvaccinated, do you have a lower chance of having autism? That's the question that people have. If you're unvaccinated, do you have a lower chance of chronic disease? And there are plenty of studies that are maybe not the best studies, or kind of been debunked, that show that maybe unvaccinated kids are healthier. And by experience of all the people that take care of vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids, almost all of them say that they feel like the unvaccinated kids are healthier. So I think that that's some interesting data that should be looked at, and it could be just biased, based on the individuals who are taking care of unvaccinated kids more. But ultimately, that's enough to signal that we need to look into this, because we have to be able to discuss the potential complications of something that we're doing. It can't all just be about reducing disease. It has to be reducing disease, but also minimizing the long-term complications. And if you're decreasing your risk of, I don't know, whooping cough, but increasing your risk of autoimmune condition at a much higher rate, but that's not a good trade-off. So the question is not, should we not be protecting against whooping cough? It's, okay, then how do we make a vaccine that can protect against whooping cough that also doesn't have that complication? But you have to identify the complications first. Then you ask, okay, why? Like, why is it increasing asthma? Why is it increasing? Is it aluminum? Is it another ingredient? Is it all of the vaccines together? Is it the schedule? Like, why is this happening? Okay, let's do it differently. Doesn't mean we have to stop vaccinating. Just figure out how to do it better.
Which, what are the chances that the better answer is to not do so many in that first year, to spread them out and to give their little bodies longer to, get all of the vaccines? And maybe we relook at the schedule altogether and say, which ones are actually truly necessary and truly have the benefits of what we're trying to achieve, and then make the rest of them optional. Which, a large question that I got out of this series was an argument of herd immunity versus, self kind of like self thought, which we'll go into later. But I'd love to hear your idea on a spaced out type of schedule versus shoving, what is it, like 80 vaccines into the first year?
Right. Well, I mean, the answer to that question depends on how safe they are, right? And that's the thing that we you don't know, right? Like I think that's the hard part with this because the mainstream medical kind of opinion, if you would ask, most doctors would be, well, why would we need to space it out? Like they're safe. They don't cause issues. You have to prove that they're causing issues before you're going to make any changes. So you have to be open to studying that in the first place. And we're not studying things prospectively forward for many years. Like you have to keep in mind the way that these things are studied. In general, they're studied before they hit the market. They're studied on their own or maybe with a few other vaccines, and they're studied for a couple months, maybe a year or two if you're lucky. They're not studied for 5 years or 10 years. They're not studied forward, and they're certainly not studied with unvaccinated kids because that's thought to be unethical. So we don't actually know, and they may cause no problems. They may have nothing through that, maybe to do with all sorts of other things, but we actually don't know. So to adjust the schedule or to make changes based on that, the first step in that is to even acknowledge that there could be an issue, then
Mm.
study that issue. And then if you do find the issue, then to ask why, and does it make changes in a scientific way based on how you prevent illness while minimizing the complications. But you have to at least acknowledge they could cause a problem first. And I don't even think we're there. I think we're still at the like, oh, it causes 1 in a million issues. Oh, there's no biological plausibility. And then you're like, we know it causes seizures. We know it causes Guillain-Barré. We know it causes encephalitis. We know that there's a list of things that it can cause. Why couldn't it cause the other things too in a subset of population sometimes? Like you just say it doesn't, but like how do you know that? How do you know that it doesn't cause that? Because some studies show that it does and some studies show that they don't, but they're almost all biased. You always see the very pro-vaccine people show the vaccines are the best thing ever and never cause an issue. And then the people that are air quotes anti-vax, their studies show that vaccines cause all sorts of problems. And I think that's because it's epidemiology and it's malleable and you can show things how you want to show them. And the only way to actually get a real answer is to follow prospectively and do the best kind of trials. And until we do that, I don't know what the best answer is. So that's where you have to go with parental choice and kind of informed consent and doing what you feel like is best. And lots of people in my practice do a slow schedule. I mean, for people that don't know me, I believe in informed consent. I don't believe in forcing people to do things. I'm not against vaccines at all. We have them in our office. We have people that do the regular schedule. Some do a slow schedule. Some don't do it. Most do some sort of slow schedule. And I don't have a problem with that personally. I think if that's what makes people comfortable doing it, then that's fine for me. And I know that's not always an option for everybody, but I think that, for the patients that they can come in as much as they want to come in, then that's fine if it makes them comfortable. And I think those are the right questions. Like, I think those are the questions we should be asking. And even simple things like, well, can we make the schedule safer? Like maybe there are ones that we need to prioritize on that there are more. And maybe we just don't have to do all of them in that first year or two. Like maybe some of them we can move to later. And yes, like you might increase the risk a little bit of some things, but that goes against, well, what is the complication rates, right? Like you can't just vaccinate for everything. There's probably at some point too much of a good thing, right? If you believe that vaccines are the best thing ever, at some point there are just too many. And maybe we're there, maybe we're not. But ultimately you can't just keep giving kids 1,000 vaccines. And so where is that point? And then when do we prioritize? Like, okay, maybe we think measles is more important, so let's keep that one in. Polio, we haven't seen that in 40 years in America, so maybe we don't have to do that for a 2-month-old. Maybe we can do that when they're 10. Obviously, if polio comes back, that would change things. But as of right now, if you haven't seen polio or diphtheria or these things, like maybe those don't need to be antigens we give a 2-month-old. Maybe we can do that later and just prioritize Haemophilus and RSV and things that your kid and whooping cough and things that your kid might actually see. Or maybe you create a different version like whooping cough. They got to get 4 or 5 in the first year or two. Like how good a vaccine is that actually, right? And even then, you still need to get them every several years, right? Though immunity goes away. So maybe getting a vaccine with aluminum in it 5 times is not the best option for protection against whooping cough. Like maybe we need a new vaccine like RSV, where it's just an antibody shot that you give kids early, and then it just lasts them for that period in the first couple of months where they're really most at risk. Like maybe that's the answer instead of giving kids 3 in the first couple of months, because we don't really need diphtheria or tetanus when you're newborn in general. So maybe you just have to protect against whooping cough, or that could be combined with one of the other vaccines they're already getting. So you have like a whooping cough Haemophilus vaccine, and that's what you give the new. I don't know what the answer is. Like this is what the smarter people are supposed to discuss, but it just seems like we're doing more and not taking anything away.
And also we're not super improving our outcomes, right? Is like the more that we're giving, the more questions parents have, the more injuries that we're finding, except these voices are being silence. No one is going to those voices and saying like, yes, we hear you, we're going to look into this, except people like you. And I think there are a growing number of providers out there who are starting to be more open to having people in their practice that are, doing a delayed schedule or no vaccines at all. But it's really hard to find. As someone who's having a baby in the next few weeks, it's been incredibly hard to find a provider. And I'm in the Boston area. So I'm in a metropolitan area. I am in a healthcare mecca of our nation. We have so many providers at our fingertips. And my questions when I interview pediatricians are, how open are you to, having me be an active participant in my child's care? How open are you to having collaborative care? And it is really alarming the number of pediatricians who will say, that's not really kind of our philosophy. And I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean that's not your, how can you be a provider and that's not your philosophy? It is so confusing to me when a provider believes and genuinely believes in their heart that they know about my baby or the decisions that I should make for my family better than I do when they see me every so often. It's a really hard pill for me to swallow.
Yeah, well, and I don't think that doctors know better than parents. I think mom's intuition is maybe the most important thing. But I think that doctors believe in vaccines so much, and many of them do. And so there are many, many providers that would say, well, if you don't believe in vaccines, then that means you don't believe in science. And I'm not the right provider for you because therefore you're going to be questioning everything else that I do. And it's going to be more difficult. And also you're not protected. Therefore, the other patients in my practice are more at risk because you're more at risk. So I get that. I do understand that perspective. I just don't totally agree with it because I personally believe that it should be people's choice of what they do. And there are many things that people choose that are very different than what I might choose. And even if I 100% agree that everybody should be vaccinated all the time, that doesn't mean that that's what everybody in my practice should do. I think our job has always been to do the best that we can for everybody, no matter what. Like if you're in the hospital and someone just murdered somebody and you're treating them, like it doesn't matter. Like that's what your title is. Like you don't worry about that. You just treat them, right? And I think that you might completely disagree with somebody's general life choices, but ultimately that's their decision to make. And medicine's moved much more into my way or the highway, and
Yep.
it's digging its heels in right now. And the craziest thing to me overall is that position is actually creating the exact opposite effect.
Yep.
And I don't think that medicine really realizes yet, but COVID basically was the failure of PR of medicine, and that's why nobody trusts doctors anymore, or very few people do compared to what they used to, because when you are not willing to partner, then people say, well, I don't trust what happened in COVID. I don't trust anything. And that's where we are. And you're seeing the highest rates of unvaccinated kids. You're seeing the highest rates of exemptions. You're seeing the highest rates of distrust in medicine. And you look at the latest polls and it's like 50+% of parents are not sure if they want to get fully vaccinated, don't believe that they should be forced anymore, or people should be forced to do it, aren't going to follow the regular schedule. Like those numbers are very different than they were even 10 years ago, like where it was like most people thought that you should be vaccinated. And it's not even most people anymore. It's like less than 50% of
Mm-hmm.
people follow a regular schedule. So that's a failure, and modern medicine has to step back and be a little bit more humble and say, like, where are we going wrong? Like, why do people not trust us? Why are people not wanting to listen? What's going on? And I think most of the answer is, instead of partnering, it's telling. It's like it's not educating, it's forcing. And I think that the most simple solution overall would be to agree that we're not going to force people to do something. And I think if we came to that agreement, then you would see the temperature really go down on the
Yeah.
vaccine field, because I think that people are just so worried they're going to be forced to do things they don't want to do. They saw it happen during COVID, and they're like, well, what happens in the next pandemic? Am I forced to do something else? What happens if I'm forced to connect my brain to something? Like, are you going to make me do that? Like, where does the line get drawn? And I don't think we need to force people to vaccinate, because the vast majority of people do anyways. You're talking like 1% of people don't vaccinate. It's not a high percent. And then there's a growing percentage that wants exemptions or doesn't do a full schedule, but does some. But it's not like 50%. I think it'd be a different conversation if you're talking like 30, 40, 50% of people aren't doing it. Then there is some discussion for some of the vaccines around herd immunity, not all of them. And I think that's also just another really crazy thing when you talk about vaccines and schools where you're forcing people to get things that don't even create herd immunity, which is true of a lot of the vaccines. So I think there's just a lot of discussion there. And I think ultimately, if you were ever to even force a vaccine, it should be things that protect other people, not just yourself. You should have those options.
Hmm.
But I don't think there's a need to force vaccines. I think that most people will do it. And I think if you educated, then just as many people would do it. And you can look across the country, and there are many states that don't force it. And yet still most people vaccinate. They're not just everyone's flocking to not vaccinate because you're not forced to do it for school. So yeah, I know the numbers are slightly increased in states where you do force it, but I'm not sure that that ultimately is going to lead to better vaccination rates. I think it's leading to more homeschooling. And I think from what I've seen, based on it's hard to like calculate because it's so complicated, but I tried to look into this, and it doesn't seem like the rates of unvaccinated kids have really changed that much. It just seems like people are leaving the system more and unvaccinated or going to other states. So I don't know that ultimately overall it really vastly increases the amount of vaccines people are getting to force them to do it. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we'll argue on that, but I think ultimately in the long run, in the short term, I think it does. Like I think for COVID, you look at it, it's like in that exact time when people were being forced, more people did it. But 5 years later, most people are not doing it anymore, right?
Hmm.
Even at that option, like very low percentage of people are doing the COVID vaccine to the point where almost nobody is, and it's not even recommended for healthy kids anymore, for healthy adults. I mean, AAP does, but CDC doesn't. I mean, that's a whole other world. But ultimately, most people were choosing not to do it, right? So it didn't work in the long term to force it. And so I think we do kind of see that with the other vaccines, and we're seeing that pushback now. And I think the more that there's a pushback, the more people are not going to do it, and less medicine acknowledges what's going on, you're going to see more and more people in the next couple of years pushing back. And I think with all the stuff going with Secretary Kennedy, it's just beginning. And I think that the momentum is started, but the reality of the concerning stuff for the mainstream doctor hasn't even begun yet. It's not even like it's just at that first step. Like there's so many more things that are going to be debated over the next couple of years, and the better solution would be to partner up. And I've never seen it. Like I see the AP Sue Secretary. I'm like, did you sit down with him? Did you guys have a conversation? Did you offer that? Did you debate anything? Like I know he's offered a debate many times in the past. Like I think people need to sit down in a room and talk about it. And I would love to see like Paul Offit sit down in a room with Secretary Kennedy, or Dr. Patel sit down in a room with Kennedy and be like, all right, here are the things that I disagree with you. Tell me why should I agree with you? Like you're saying this, tell me why. And he's a smart guy. Like he can remember a lot of facts, so he'll be able to spew off what he believes. And I think ultimately the solution will be to have those conversations, and maybe there's some middle ground there, and probably people agree on a good chunk of stuff. And maybe some of the doctors will be like, oh, I didn't even know that, because there's a lot that I didn't know that I learned. And I think there's a lot that Secretary Kennedy knows because he's been in that air quotes anti-vax world,
Hmm.
and he understands the autism research. He understands the literature around how vaccines were studied. And I don't think a lot of doctors do. I really don't. I just don't think that they've ever looked at it themselves. And I think if they did, they would be surprised, and they would have more questions than they actually do today.
Yeah. Oh my God, this conversation is just like so therapeutic and validating for me. This is like a therapy session. So back in COVID, and I'm just a doula. I am not a medical professional. I have no medical background. I am just a doula, but I do pride myself on trying to be very unbiased and neutral, and I really pride myself on seeing both sides, and it's something that I work very hard to do. And so when I have someone that thinks very opposite of what kind of I think, I always try and think about their perspective and where are they coming from and how are they making this decision and what has led them to this train of thought, right? And so in COVID, I was very loud about this is not the way. You are going to ruin the public's trust in medicine if you do not stop forcing people to do things. If there's one thing I know, it is when you force a human to do something, they are going to rebel. It is just human nature. There is always going to be a resistance. And I got a lot of pushback, and a lot of people made fun of me for just being a doula. You're just a doula. You're uneducated. You don't know. You're not part of the medical system. And now it turns out that that was true, and that you really have created this huge divide. And what I think that the healthcare system is missing at this point is that they no longer get unbridled trust. They have to earn it back because people, they're firm in where they are now. There is no more flexibility. There is no more of the American population going and being like, well, they did make a mistake, but I still trust them about that. People are firm. They do not trust medicine. They are very skeptical of mainstream doctors, and they are leaving the system in droves, and they feel good about it. That's the thing, is they don't feel shaky or unsure about their confidence when leaving the system. They are doing it confidently, and they are saying this system no longer serves me, and I'm going to leave, and I'm going to see a naturopath, I'm going to see a nurse practitioner, I'm going to a vaccine neutral pediatrician, and I feel great about it. And I think so part of me is very happy for that, because I love watching people like stand in their voice, and I truly believe that informed consent and medical autonomy is like our highest right. So that makes me happy. I feel very sad that it has eroded the trust to a place where I do think there's a portion of the population that, even if they get in a situation where they need mainstream media, their trust may have been eroded so far that they don't seek the care that they need. And I just get a little fearful of that. And the other piece of this is that my heart breaks when I see pediatricians, like firing or releasing patients because they don't fully vaccinate or they want to follow a delayed schedule. In my brain, I don't know how that's legal and ethical. And again, seeing both sides, I resonate with the fact that you don't agree with that person or that family's choice. But how is it ethical for you to not give them any care, and to possibly, depending on where you live and the state that you're in and the laws that are in your state, you might have left that family with completely no care at all? I don't know, as a provider, how you sleep at night knowing, well, I have fired this person and they're unlikely to be able to find another pediatrician or another doctor because they're not vaccinating. They have no records of vaccinations. And so are you okay with that as a provider, that you might have left this family completely without pediatric care? For me, I struggle with that so bad.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the other, like we kind of talked about it, but it's just this, there's a legal aspect, and then there's an ethical, or I guess moral, or just personal choice. And legally, yeah, you can fire them. I mean, the only reason you can't see someone in business is you can't get rid of somebody discrimination. And vaccine status is not seen as discriminatory, but you're kind of, like, if you want to like really put words to it, you are discriminating against someone for their medical choices, but medical choices is not
Definitely.
the class. So legally you can't do that. But morally, I mean, that's just a different question, because that's again where morals are different. Like you might think, and I might think, I think we're on the same page. Like I think it's not right to just fire someone because they make a different choice than you. But on the other side, the doctors think, well, it's not right to have a person who's unvaccinated in my practice that puts other people at danger. That's their belief, and so they think that it's immoral to keep them there. So I get their perspective. I totally understand. I just don't agree with it. But I also think to some degree that as long as there's enough doctors that are taking the patients that people can get their care, then you probably don't want to go to that doctor who doesn't want to have you there. If you don't want to do vaccines, you probably want to go somewhere that you can have those discussions, because what you get in a situation where you are not wanting to do that, but then you're going to a doctor who doesn't want, you don't have good communication, and then some other thing comes up and you really do need their help, and then they're like dismissing you because they think you're a woo-woo parent, and then they miss the diagnosis that they would have otherwise got. Whereas like if you had good communication, you might have said the things you needed to say to the doctor, so they could have figured out and protected your kids. So I think that there's a danger there without good communication. And so you do want to be someone that has good communication. But I think from a systems perspective, I hope that we move somewhere back to the middle. And that's why I wrote the book, right? Because it's about moving to the middle. And like doctors like Dr. Patel, it's like, I'm on the same team as him, but like we're all the same team. There's no team. We're on the team of helping kids, right? And so, we might not agree on every single thing. And I wouldn't agree with any doctor on any single thing, or anybody in politics or RFK or anybody else. Like that's fine. But I think that if we could have more discussions and debates like this, we may not agree on everything. We probably would agree on 99% of things. And those other, 1 or 5% of things, you could debate it and discuss it. Like I would love as much as possible, because I'm happy to be convinced of something else. I just don't understand some perspectives. And it's really hard to understand the very, very, very pro-vax perspective when they're never willing to have a discussion or debate about it. And it's like, you never hear the Paul Offits or Peter Hotez's or like the really, like, well, I think like Paul Offit's probably the best communicator when it comes to vaccines, and his books are great, and I read them all for my book, and I think they're excellent if you want the CDC perspective. But you never hear him, at least I haven't heard him, getting like really pressed on some of these questions that like Secretary Kennedy or individuals of that nature or someone even like you would have, and kind of push them to be like, well, why do you think that you can have 1,000 vaccines? Why are you not worried about small amounts of aluminum or fetal tissue when someone could walk by a peanut and they could get anaphylaxis? Like, why couldn't that be a problem for some kids? Why are you not worried that there are no vaccinated versus unvaccinated trials? Why do you feel like it's unethical to do an unvaccinated trial? Like, I want to know those answers, and you never hear them because they never talk about them and they never get pushed, and they don't do debates. They don't go on, the Joe Rogans and Tucker Carlson's or whatever. They're not going into places where they're going to get pushed. So you don't have the other side, and I would love to know it because it might change my mind. But I like, for example, I read Paul Offit's recent book. I think it's called like Vaccines in Your Family.
Oh.
And you go through the asthma and allergy section, and you go through it and you read it, and it's like, there's no research that shows that vaccines cause allergies or asthma. And I'm like, but that's not true. Like, there are good studies in good journals that show that it might. And you didn't mention any of those studies, and you just listed off these 10 studies. And while those studies may be better, I don't know, maybe they're not, but they're not bad studies. It's not wrong with the studies, but it's like there is another side to it. And you need to look at both. And why are you writing a book and saying that it's never causing a problem when there's research in like the Journal of Immunology and the Journal of Allergy that shows like, hey, look, like there with increasing aluminum, there's increasing asthma rates. Like, these are very pro-vaccine people saying these things. Like, why aren't you quoting that study too? I need to see both, and we need to be able to have both on display so people can start to understand why people that are hesitant are hesitant.
Hmm.
And I just don't see that happening. And I think if you heard somebody like Paul Offit being a little bit more nuanced, it would be helpful to the middle, which I think is most people. I don't think most people are like, vaccines are the greatest thing ever, I'm always going to do it. Or most people like, I'm never doing it. Most parents are in the middle, and they're like, I want to protect my kid. I just want to make sure I don't cause a problem. And what, 30 vaccines? I got to do how many today? 6 vaccines? That seems like a lot. I only did like 5 when I was a kid, and I turned out okay. Like, is that okay? That's not an unreasonable question when you're like, wait, what? Like, do you want to give my kid 4 vaccines today? Is that okay? And then you're like, oh yeah, it's safe, don't worry, it doesn't cause any problems. You're like, are you sure it doesn't cause any problems? Because you said that about a COVID vaccine, and then my friend got myocarditis, and my other friend died. So it's like, I don't know. I'm just not sure that I trust you when you say that it doesn't cause an issue. Like, prove it to me. And I
Yeah.
don't think that they have that proof. Not really.
Yeah, and one of the best questions I equip my clients with, or anyone really who comes to me with vaccine questions, is ask your pediatrician if they have read the insert of what they are recommending. No, of course, you're at the mercy of that provider to tell you the truth. You would hope that they are going to be honest with you, and if they are, most of them say, no, I haven't. And I think that is enough reason to have pause in their recommendation in and of itself, is that you're recommending something nearly blindly to me because you've been recommended to give it, but you haven't gone to the lengths to actually read the inserts, which leads me to my next question of herd immunity, and the fact that one of the biggest questions that came from this series was, you've got people on both sides of this camp. People who say, I would never want to be seen by a pediatrician who allowed unvaccinated or delayed vaccine schedule people in their practice because you're putting my child at risk. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have parents who say, well, if your vaccines work, why does my child need to be vaccinated? And then Katie, the PA, who was part of that series, she talks about on her Instagram that when you actually do dive into the inserts, many of them state that we're unsure actually how long immunity lasts, and we're unsure exactly when do we reach herd immunity. So both of those things are more like an estimate or a guess. Tell us what is on your mind about those two things. Herd immunity versus, like, if your vaccines work, why does my child need to be vaccinated? How do we actually achieve herd immunity if we don't really know the hard numbers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of the most important ethical debates when it comes to vaccine that we never have a debate on, because it's so nuanced and it's so complicated and it's not clear cut and there is no exact answer. And you know, in the book, like I spent a whole section on this because I think it was so important. And ultimately the conclusions are, it's really nuanced. And I think we should get into it because it's super interesting topic that people want to make it so simple, and it's extraordinarily complicated because, first of all, most vaccines or many vaccines don't have anything to do with herd immunity. So they only protect you. The research is very clear. It's for your protection and not for somebody else. It doesn't stop it because you can still pass it along. So things like the polio vaccine, it just protects you. It doesn't protect other people. If you have the oral polio, it does protect other people, but we stopped doing the oral polio vaccine. So it just protects you. Some of the respiratory diseases, like say whooping cough, you might get some protection in terms of your symptoms, but you can still carry, you can still pass it on. We saw that with COVID, right? It's very similar. I think it's more in people's minds now, so maybe they understand it a little bit more, but I don't think we really recognize it. And I certainly didn't learn about this, but you would think like, oh, you're protecting for everyone's got to get protection for whooping cough to protect the baby. But the reality is the research actually shows that it doesn't protect other people, not really. And it actually, you carry it in your nose and you can still pass it along. So there's hypothetical for even something like whooping cough where you don't know you have whooping cough, so you're not going to keep yourself away from other people, and you actually still carry it. And maybe you're more likely to give it to other people because you didn't even know. And if you were coughing really badly, you would stay away. So that's, you know, one theory. The other theory is you're not coughing as much, you can't pass it on. But either way, you can still pass it. So just because you get a whooping cough vaccine doesn't mean you protect other people. And I think people need to understand that. Whereas measles, if you get a measles vaccine, it works very well, and you very likely won't get measles, and you will protect other people.
Oh,
Because you never get to the point where you get contagious, so you don't pass on. And that's why where herd immunity comes in, because for something like measles, it's pretty well studied. About 95% of people get a vaccine, then there's nowhere for that disease to go. So it can't be passed to other people. So that's where herd immunity comes from. And it is a real concept, and it really does happen. And you see that. I mean, the best example I can give is chickenpox, right? I think that's the easiest one for people to think about because it occurred in our lifetime. Like, you know, there's always this debate about like, oh, was it all sanitation? Was it all vaccines? And it's like, no, it was both, right? It was both. All of the infections basically were plummeting down before vaccines hit the market, and mortality was basically at zero before vaccines hit the market. So that's true. A lot of other factors went into play in terms of nutrition and sanitation, but there were still lots of diseases 50 years ago, right? There were still lots of measles and lots of chickenpox and lots of Haemophilus before vaccines hit the market. And then you saw those diseases plummet down to almost nothing. When we were growing up, everybody had chickenpox, right? But we had good sanitation and we had antibiotics, all the things, you know, 20 years ago, right? Or 30 years ago. But now you don't see chickenpox anymore. Why is that? Because you have herd immunity now, because people got a vaccine and they're protected. So you don't see it getting passed around because nobody has the ability to even get it anymore. Now, there's a lot of discussion, debate over good, bad, whatever with chickenpox. Won't go there. But in terms of herd immunity, there is herd immunity from chickenpox. So do you need chickenpox vaccine? I don't know. Most kids do fine. But on the grand scale of the millions of kids that get it, do a couple of kids get really sick? Yes. So that's the argument for herd immunity for the kid that couldn't get a vaccine, that the vaccine didn't work, that's immunocompromised, that's a newborn baby, for the one kid that gets meningitis or a bad pneumonia and gets really sick. Like, it's not super common that will happen, but it could happen. So you are protecting the community. You are decreasing the amount of illness, the amount of sick days. So there are reasons why it's positive. And then the debate is whether you should or shouldn't do it and whether you should be forced to. But there is a positive reason to have herd immunity. But the question then of ethics is, should you or do you need to? Right. And I think that people think that's so simple. Like, yeah, you should protect everybody. You don't want anybody to get sick. And obviously, I don't want anybody to get measles and die. But that still doesn't mean that people should be forced to do something, because everybody's line of where that is different. And you have to think about it along that continuum. Like, okay, one vaccine you're being forced to get. Oh, okay, it's one vaccine. What about if you're forced to get 30 or 50 or 100, or in the future forced to get 1,000 vaccines to protect everybody else? Where is that line? What about if you are forced to give a kidney because there's some other kid that needs a kidney and they're going to die? So you're protecting the community. You're giving herd kidneys, but you know, most people wouldn't necessarily give up their kidney to some random stranger. Or what if you have to hook up your brain to protect everybody in the future? Like, these are things that are possible. Obviously, much more than a vaccine. It's hyperbolic, but the point is there's a different line. And so when you're saying you need to protect other people, the question is, okay, well, where is the line that I feel is acceptable that I should do something to protect somebody else, because I personally might feel like these vaccines or this vaccine is a risk for my child. And shouldn't I be able to prioritize my child over somebody else? And everyone has a different line there, but maybe your kid is the very sensitive kid who, oh, I don't know, maybe got their vaccines at 2 months and had serious reaction to it that you believe. And now they're a year old and you're like, I don't really know if I want to give them the MMR because they're so, they're so fragile. They had such a bad reaction. Like, I feel like the risk is really high for my kid. I think I'm going to do MMR when they're 5 because I don't want to do any more vaccines because I'm really worried and I feel in my heart that's going to cause a problem. Who's protecting that kid?
Mm.
Like, and so should that kid be forced to do it, even though there's a serious potential risk for that kid who's already had a reaction? Like, that kid is contributing to herd immunity or not contributing to it, but you're saying they should be forced to do it because they're going to protect somebody else. So it's complicated because every situation is different, and that's why I think it has to come back to individual choice ultimately, and not force. But on the flip side, like, we do want to protect other people, and we do have laws to protect other people, like seatbelts and other things. So it is, it's complicated and it's nuanced and it's not so simple. And when people try to simplify it down to, oh, you're just trying to kill Johnny, but you don't care about everybody else, like, well, no, I don't know. That's not exactly what a lot of parents are thinking. They're thinking, I'm weighing the risks of the benefits, and I feel like the risks outweigh the benefits for my kid at this time. So I'm choosing to do something else. And I think that's not always unreasonable, and they're not just evil people doing that. I've met lots of people that want to do slow schedules that are really educated and, have looked into it, and they just don't feel like it's a good choice for them. And I don't know that I should be able to tell you that you're right or wrong or that you're evil for making that choice. I don't know. I think, again, it's complicated, and anybody that wants to simplify it to, like, just, oh, herd immunity. Well, first of all, most of the vaccines don't cause herd immunity, and then second of all, for the ones that do, it's still complicated, I think.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I didn't know that about the herd immunity. And I guess it does actually give a little bit more validity to like the idea of, well, if this vaccine is only really protecting you, then what does it matter if I get vaccinated or not? Because if you've gotten vaccinated, then you should be protected as much as the vaccine is going to provide for you. And I'm taking on the risk of, quote unquote, risk of not being vaccinated. If you've been following me online, then you know that I have spent the last several years battling, and I say that very intentionally, battling trying to find a good, clean deodorant. Several years ago, I learned about the harmful chemicals that were put in a lot of our skincare products, and one of the worst offenders is actually our deodorant. Well, since your deodorant goes on every single day, and for some people, multiple times a day, and for some people, directly after you shower, and it's put on right in your underarms, which is such a center point to your lymphatic system, I knew that that's where I wanted to start when I started my journey of getting rid of harmful products in my life and my home and replacing them with cleaner products. Now, little naive me set out and thought, well, I'll just go buy clean deodorant. And boy, was I shocked when I walked down the aisle and couldn't find a clean deodorant. There didn't seem to be a single product that met all of the things on my checklist. I was looking for truly clean ingredients, not a whitewashed label. I was truly looking for a product that didn't have fragrance or parfum in it. I am really, really adamant that fragrances do not come into my home in any form. And so if I was going to go with a clean deodorant, I was really, really strict that it was truly clean. Over the years, I have tried so many brands. Matter of fact, it's kind of become this joke in all of my friend groups because when they find a quote unquote clean ingredient deodorant, they will send it to me and say, have you tried this or did it not pass the HeHe test? And, a lot of them really don't. For so long, I struggled with irritation in my underarms. I mean, at one point, you guys, the skin of my underarms was literally peeling off, and I had these blisters underneath my skin basically, and they were so painful. I mean, there have been so many events that I would have to be smiling and bearing through the pain because my underarms were on fire. It was absolutely horrible. There were several times where I had to sit with ice packs or warm washcloths underneath my arms just to find comfort and relief from what these clean deodorants, so-called clean deodorants, had done to my skin. I know it may sound a little dramatic, but I've cried a number of tears over this because it is something that's really important to me to put clean ingredient products on my body, yet the very one that I wanted so desperately to find, I couldn't find anything that was healthy for my body. It either didn't work and left me stinky, or it didn't work because it caused skin irritation, or it simply just wasn't a clean ingredient deodorant. Now, I did this for so long that I finally gave in and I bought a traditional deodorant. Yeah, I did. I went to CVS. I bought Secret, I cried over it, and I started to use it because I didn't know what else to do. It was actually horrible. It caused me so much mental and emotional anguish because I just wanted to have a clean deodorant and I couldn't find one, and I felt so frustrated. And while I am certainly the personality that is like, well, if I can't find it, then I'll just make it myself. First of all, I know nothing about making skincare products. And second of all, I'm already building something. I did not have the time or the wherewithal to take on making a skincare product. You know, I even tried a salt rock underneath my arms. I even once tried rubbing lemon on my underarms. I mean, when I say I did it all, I literally tried everything to find a clean alternative to deodorant, and nothing worked. So when I learned about Zebra, I was honestly skeptical. I was like, not another one of these clean deodorant brands. I'm probably going to invest all this money into a tube of deodorant and it's just going to leave me with irritated skin or stinky armpits or more tears because it didn't live up to my expectations. But on the contrary, boy, was I so happy. You guys, I really cannot even tell you how much Zebra deodorant changed my life. And I gotta be honest, I absolutely love the name Zebra because it is so indicative of their black and white ingredients. They are a non-toxic, freedom-loving brand who answers to no one and creates a product that is transparent that you can truly trust. The quest to find clean ingredients and wholesome products in a nation that has subpar standards for our people has been so hard. It's really been a real trial of love for me. If it didn't matter so much to me, I would have given up years ago. But you know me, I'm not giving up and I will not be beat. So I'm so excited that I finally came across Zebra and I finally found a brand and a product that not only do I love and it works, but I totally trust this company. To get your hands on the deodorant that I love and use every single day and trust with my body to keep me from being a smelly cat, head to yayzebra.com. That's YAYzebra.com and use code HeHe, HeHe, to save now. That's yayzebra.com using the code HeHe to save 10% on your order right now. It's just, it's so deep. And I think this is why a lot of people actually shy away from this conversation, is because they don't want to get into these deep conversations and they don't want to take the time to actually do the research and they don't want to be uncomfortable, right? Like a lot of people don't want to sit in the discomfort of maybe having to admit that they were wrong or that they had an idea in their head that didn't end up being true or that they've been spouting out stuff that isn't true because they didn't actually read the inserts and they don't truly know what the manufacturers say.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, it's an extraordinarily complicated topic because as soon as you start to get into the weeds and start to have questions, then if you're a parent and you gave your kid vaccines, you're like, oh, wait, what
Did I
risks are
mess up?
did
Yeah.
I do that? Did I cause the autism? Did I cause the chronic condition? You start to worry about that. And I think that's a really important. So it's easier just not to talk about. If you're a doctor, you're giving vaccines, you don't want to think that you're creating issues. So you want to know that like what you've done for your career and what you believe in is not creating problems. So I think that's uncomfortable. I think there's so much discomfort in this discussion. And then let's just say we get all the research that we want and it does show that vaccines cause a problem. Okay, then what? Then people stop vaccinating and then all these diseases come back. Like that's also uncomfortable because like that would happen. Like I would think that I think some of the diseases wouldn't be so bad and some of them wouldn't come back that much. And I think we have precedent for that where there's a lot of diseases which we don't have vaccines for that like tuberculosis, you know, you don't vaccinate in general, but most people don't get it. So I think a lot of them would still be not around that much. But like something like measles, yeah, that would probably, if everyone just stopped vaccinating, they'd probably come back like crazy, and most people would get it. And then you know, your question is, well, how severe would that be? And is that worse than everybody being vaccinated and the complications of the vaccine? So it's nuanced, but it's uncomfortable to think if vaccines are bad and cause problems, then what happens to all those diseases? And if vaccines do cause those problems, then did we do that? Like, should we do that? But I think the answer to that is the science and
Mm.
honesty and research, and nothing is truly bad or good. There's no like anti-vax or pro-vax. It's all ridiculous. They're just people with concerns and different people with different levels of understanding of different things. And ultimately, the goal should be to have healthy kids. At least for me personally, like I don't care if kids in the future get 1,000 vaccines or zero, as long as they're the healthiest. And I've said
Yeah.
that many times. If it ultimately comes out and we do all the best research and vaccines cause no problems at all, I'm very happy to give 10,000 vaccines. That's fine, you know. But if that causes more problems than good, then I'd rather have zero vaccines. Like I don't know, I don't care what the answer is. I just want kids to be healthy. And I think if we had that mentality with science and we were open to vaccines having problems sometimes or causing issues sometimes, and more than we kind of say that they do, then we could probably make them better and probably make them safer. But I don't feel like we're having those discussions in general, and I don't think that a lot of parents feel like medicine and doctors care about vaccine safety. They care about protecting you from diseases, and they don't want your kid to get hepatitis B, and they don't want your kid to die of vitamin K deficient bleeding. They don't want your kid to, you know, get pneumococcus or Haemophilus. Of course, they don't. That they don't really seem to care or care to discuss the safety and the possible complications. And instead, it's well, they're safe. They don't cause problems. It never really happens, and that is pushing parents away, who I think want to feel at least like people have heard that there could be a problem and are researching it to try to make it safer. Nobody, I think, thinks that like vaccines are never going to cause a problem or going to be 100% safe or never cause an issue. I don't think that's realistic for any medicine, but I do think that parents want to feel like we're moving in a better direction. We understand that they could cause issues. We're trying to make them safer. We're always going to make them better. And we understand that they could cause complications sometimes. I think if that happened, most people would have a lot more trust in medicine. And I don't think that's anti-science or woo-woo or anything. I just think that people don't feel like doctors care about vaccine safety. They care about disease prevention, I guess. And
Mm.
you can care about both things. I think you can care about both, and you don't have to want a kid to get measles to also want the measles vaccine to be as safe as possible. And both things could be true. So I think if the discussion kind of shifted in that direction, we'd be in a better place.
I think it's hard too because when you look at kids these days, we are sicker. I mean, as a whole society, we're sicker than we were 10 years ago, which was sicker than we were 20 years ago, which was sicker 30 years ago. We continue to get sicker and sicker and sicker, yet we claim that medicine is being more and more advanced. And I think in some regards, it is, right? Like in cardiology, we're able to save people who 10 years ago would have died from cardiac complications. But when it comes to childhood disease, it's only increasing. And so I think parents are super valid in asking these questions and saying, why is this? And I don't think that it's just vaccines. I don't actually think anybody thinks it's just vaccines. It's in our water sources, it's in our food, it's in our insecticides and pesticides, it's in screen time, it's in, lunchroom foods at school. It's in all of it. I really do I understand that. But to say to parents, well, this is safe, we've always done it, it's like, yeah, and look at the outcomes of having all of this be put on our children. It's really valid. I also think that one of the best places we could start, boy, I hope I don't get canceled for this. I hope this doesn't get taken down for this, but I don't know that we ever are going to have footing if we don't remove immunity from the manufacturers until they are able to be held accountable for injuries caused from their products. It is almost null and void, this entire discussion, because what incentive do they have to make a better vaccine? What do they care? They can injure as many people as they want, and you essentially can't prove it. And even if you can, so what? You can't sue us.
Yeah, I mean, we said a lot there. So let me come back to the immunity part because that's super important. But even before that, so the reality is we have more chronic disease than we had before, a lot more. We have like 50% of kids have chronic disease, 75% of adults. It's insane numbers, and it shouldn't be that way. And it wasn't that way just a few decades ago. Medicine needs some humility to look at that.
Yeah.
You just hear, oh yeah, well, people used to die at 40. Okay, that's true. Like there's a lot that we've done good in modern medicine. We're great in emergency care and birth and many things that we people used to die that they don't die. So there's a lot that's good, but also life expectancy started going back down for the first time ever, and chronic disease is skyrocketing. And so I think we need to have a little bit of humility to say, look, there's a lot that we've done really well in medicine, and we can save your life. We have antibiotics and a lot of great things. But also, there's a bunch of things that we're clearly not doing that well, and we're not doing as well as we did 100 years ago or 50 years ago. And that is why chronic disease is skyrocketing, and that's why life expectancy is going back down. So let's be humble. Let's look at what's changed over the last 100 years, everything, not just vaccines, all the things. And let's see, well, maybe we could decrease our death from infectious disease, but also minimize chronic disease. And let's start to see life expectancy go up, and maybe people can be living more healthy till 90 or 100 or 110 or whatever it is. And so I think both things can be true, but clearly what we're doing as a society is not very good for chronic disease and for living healthy. We are living longer than 100 years ago, but we're not living necessarily longer than 20 years ago.
Mm.
I think that's something that just needs to be taken into account, to be humble. And that includes vaccines, because we're doing a lot more vaccines, and vaccines actually stimulate your immune system, it's supposed to do. So to assume that they can never cause a problem to your immune system doesn't make any sense to me. I would think it could and should do that sometimes. And we should just be figuring out why it happens, who it happens to, what are the genetics, what are the environment, what's the load. I think that, like you said, it's many, many things. I've seen kids with autism that never had a vaccine. So obviously that's not the only thing doing it, or any sorts of asthma, allergies, all sorts of stuff that they never had a vaccine. So of course it's not the only thing, but it's one thing that we're doing that's stimulating your immune system. And maybe in a certain setup for certain kids, it pushes them over the edge, or you start to see it after you get it, or whatever it is. So I think that it should be included in the discussion. So that's kind of point one. Point two about immunity. I think that's just a big deal. I mean, I think that there's nothing else in America, or really anywhere, that has immunity like that. And what has come of that is there's no reason for them to study things to find for safety. It's really about getting it on the market. So they do whatever they can to show benefit without necessarily having to really study things in the best way for safety, like they do for most medications. Most medications they study for a long time, because if it causes a problem after 5 years, they're going to get sued up the wazoo. With vaccines, they don't have to worry about that. So they study it for a year or 2 or 6 months, and they say, oh yeah, it's safe. And then, any longer term problems, you're like, well, it's on the market, so whatever, we can't have you sued, too bad. And who's studying it anyways? So that is how they're doing it. It's not nefarious, it's just how it is. But I think that we need very in-depth discussions about what we would do about immunity. I think, the first step should certainly be easier than taking away immunity, which is they should have, somebody actually checking up and doing their own studies and looking at safety and not trusting what they're doing. So I think you don't have to take away immunity to have the CDC or the NIH study vaccines and study vaccine safety and say that what they are actually doing is actually what we see in real life. Like, we could certainly have that. And then you'd have to have a nuanced conversation about how you would potentially remove liability, or maybe they have limited liability, or I don't know what, but you couldn't. Let's just imagine that you're like, oh, vaccines cause asthma. right? Or autism or whatever. Like, how could you just start suing these companies? It would be million, trillion. They don't have that much money. They'd all go bankrupt. You'd have no vaccines. So,
Hmm.
and that's the other issue with right now. Let's say that you were to prove that vaccines cause autism. Well, who do you sue right now? You sue the government. It's a fund that who would pay for all that if you were to say that something like that was caused by it? We don't have all those trillions and hundreds of trillions of dollars for all those
But
lawsuits.
does Big Pharma not have that much money? I mean, it goes
Not that much
around.
money.
You don't think so?
Imagine if I don't think so. If every person who had autism sued, for how many millions would you get for your kids dying of something or having autism or asthma or allergies? There's so many kids around the world. If everyone got $1 million, or they wouldn't have that much money. They would just go out of business and they would stop producing them.
Oh, I struggle with this because it's kind of like, well, you did the damage.
I,
So,
I'm not saying it's
I
wrong or right.
mean,
I'm just saying this is the complication, because if you agree that it causes an issue, but you also agree that it has some benefit, then you also don't necessarily just want them to go out of business and nobody to make
right.
vaccines anymore.
Okay.
I mean, I would want them to make the safest vaccines possible. I want them to be forced to make them good and better and protect us and not cause problems. So I think there's some middle ground there where maybe there's some limited liability you could have. Maybe there's some, I don't even know. I don't even know that they should like not be liable for what's happened in the past, but I don't know that you can make them liable for something they didn't have liability for. So maybe it's like
Hmm.
forward they have liability now for new vaccines. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. It's very complicated, but I think it's a big problem that they have no liability, and I think that that's what keeps the checks and balances in general. And we don't have that check, so there is no balance, and they just have every incentive to get something on the market without any incentive to keep it safer. And there has to be some sort of check on that. And I just don't think most doctors would know that either. Like, I didn't know that they had liability. Why would you know that? And I think that's a big thing, because then it explains why you study one vaccine versus another, why you try to get something on the market, and you're like, oh well, we can't study it one vaccine against nothing because then it's unethical. Well, what about the first time you study it, right? Like I understand some of them were studied a long time ago, but like pneumococcus was not that old and it was studied against meningococcus. Like there was no pneumococcus on the market. They could have studied, or at least at a minimum, we could come up and say, look, the CDC, the NIH, the FDA, they're not approving any more new vaccines. There's no other vaccine on the market. Not one we already have that we have a previous one, but something new. If we're going to put a new vaccine on the market, like the first RSV vaccine or whatever, it has to have inert placebo controlled trials. We're not approving it unless you do that. That should be the bare minimum, because that should always be the bare minimum. We should study things for the best way possible for safety. And there's no ethics for a new product for safety testing to say that. There is ethics around, we're studying a new whooping cough vaccine. We have an old whooping cough vaccine. I understand those ethics. I still think it's very controversial because they didn't study a lot of these things originally the way they should have. So you're basically in this setup, which is like, all right, let's get the vaccine on the market. We don't study it the best possible way. Now it's on the market. We say that it's effective. Well, now we can never study it for safety because you can't do it. So like there's that problem too, but we can stop that problem moving forward at least by requiring it for anything new.
Mm.
Then, I don't know what the answer is going to be for the old vaccines, because it's really difficult to do that. But I think the answer would ultimately be to do those prospective trials, vaccinated versus unvaccinated, just see what we find. And you're not going to be able to do it individually, but at least you're going to look at it globally. And I think that's going to be as good as we're going to get.
Now, when you say inert placebo, you mean a vaccine versus a saline.
Correct. So versus saline. So most vaccines are studied against another vaccine. That's just how it is. They say placebo, air quotes, but that's so that they can say, oh yeah, they're all placebo-controlled trial, but they're really not. They're really not. You look at it, and basically every vaccine on the schedule for kids is studied against other vaccines, and that's how it was studied all the way back until the first trials, which generally were done a long time ago. They don't do studies like they do today. So you're like, oh yeah, let's study you against your brother and see how it goes, and we're studying you for efficacy. Like that's how the original like whooping cough vaccines were when you're talking about like 20s, 30s, 40s, they're not studying like they were today because they didn't do research like today. And then you take the DTP vaccine off the market because you're concerned about risks of encephalitis and seizure, never proven, but concerned. And then you're studying the new whooping cough versus the old one, and you're saying it's safe, but you're studying it only against the old one you took off. So that's why it matters, because the question is, okay, but is it safe against nothing? And now we can't study that. And that's not to say, does the vaccine work? Efficacy, we know, we have a good understanding, but it's about safety. And we don't have those. And people say, oh, no, we've done tons of, no, you have not. They have not done a ton of inert placebo controlled trials. I have looked at that long sheet. I've been involved with HHS and other people who have talked about all those studies. They're all the inert placebo trials basically are on other vaccines we don't use here. for the regular schedule. So they've done it. There's one flu trial. They did some actually for COVID vaccines, but basically any of the vaccines on our childhood schedule have not been in their placebo-controlled trials ever. That's just how it is. That's just their reality. And that can't be true moving forward. Like we can't allow the research to be what it is. Like look at the hepatitis B vaccine. It's insanity that in the insert it says Hep B study for 5 days, 4 days with 147 people. You're like, what? That can't be true. You're like, that cannot be true. That cannot be the safety that we're basing this on. That cannot be the safety that was agreed upon to give to kids. But it is true. It's right there. And Aaron Siri sued the government, FOIA them to get more information. He said the same thing. He was like, that can't possibly be true. They didn't give him anything else. So unless there's some magical repository of safety data somewhere, that's what they based it upon. That's what safety for giving a newborn a vaccine is. And you sit here and I'm like, again, I'm not wanting anybody to get hepatitis B, but that's not good enough. Like,
Yeah.
that's not good enough, and it can't be good enough. And doctors have to come together and say, look, if that's what hepatitis B was based upon, that doesn't mean we shouldn't give hepatitis B, but we should reevaluate it. But at least at a minimum, let's sit here and say, never again are we going to allow a newborn baby to get a vaccine that hasn't been studied in the way that we've all agreed is the most appropriate way to study it for safety. That has to be acknowledged what was done, because it can't ever be done again. And it shouldn't have ever been done, but like you can't go back and change it, I guess. So we have to be able to acknowledge that. So you say, look, if we're going to give, I don't know, let's say we're going to change the whooping cough vaccine to make a new one. Like, we're not going to study it for 5 days. We're going to study it for years, and we're going to make sure it doesn't cause a problem before we do it. That's not anti-vaccine. I don't want to give my newborn baby something that hasn't been studied the best, most possible way in tens of thousands of kids, following them for 5 or 10 years to make sure it doesn't cause problems. Because I'm not trying to give my baby problems. I'm trying to protect them. There's nothing anti-science or anti-vaccine about that. That should be the standard, and it's never been. I don't think that's controversial. I think that's the way it should be.
Which is so wild that some people make it controversial, right? That for me is where I struggle a lot. It's like the fallacy and the argument of, well, if you question vaccines at all, then you must be anti-science. And it's like that is so far from the truth. It almost for me is more pro science. I'm asking you for more data. I'm asking you for more science to help me understand the safety behind this. And when you can't provide it to me, it makes me think you don't actually know what you're talking about, or that maybe that data just doesn't exist and you're trying to, pull one over on me.
It's literally opposite. It's like how many parents who went and got a vaccine had a bad reaction and then started talking about it were called anti-vax. It's like, it's the most insane thing. The person literally went in to get a vaccine. They feel like they had a problem, and now they're called anti-vax because they feel like they had a problem. They could be wrong. Their kid could have had a heart attack this afternoon, got a vaccine this morning, and has nothing to do with it. But if a lot of people are having heart attacks the same day they get a vaccine, you should probably look into it. You should
Mm-hmm.
not call them anti-vax. You should always say, hey, that's interesting. We don't want a lot of kids getting heart attacks. Oh, they're all getting vaccines this morning? Well, maybe we should study it to make sure they're not causing heart attacks. There's nothing anti-vaccine about that. Like, that's just data that you should be using. And when a whole bunch, thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people will say, look, my kid went in to get a vaccine this day, and then the next day they were a totally different kid. That should be something we should be listening to and not dismissing. I mean, they could be wrong, but I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people said the same thing. The data
And
is
are wrong.
and are
Yeah.
wrong. I don't know. Maybe they're all wrong, but like that just doesn't jive with me as a common sense. I think something can happen sometimes, and we're not getting that data because we're not trying to study it. We're trying to avoid it. And every time that something discusses or studies this, it gets shut down, probably by the forces that have the money to keep the information as it should be. Like that I think that's not evil. It's just business. And that's just how it is. And if you're a big pharma company, you're going to do everything you can to make sure that people get as many of your products as possible. And if somebody comes out and says something that like, oh, this happened, no, it didn't. It's never been proven for that. You're right, it's never been proven because you have to study it to prove it, and they'll do everything to make sure that it doesn't get studied. Otherwise, I would think we'd have all sorts of studies, because you would think that'd be front page of the New York Times if you were like, look, we looked at Harvard or Kaiser, 10 million people, we follow them for 20 years, and the unvaccinated kids were exactly the same as the vaccinated kids for autism. You could run that study in 15 minutes if as an epidemiologist, and you don't see that ever. So it's a red flag for me that that's never happened. And I don't know I don't want to be conspiratorial because I don't know the reason, but you're like, why is there no vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies? Like, I thought there was a ton when I started writing the book. I still thought there was a ton because that's what we've always been taught. Like, I just assumed there was all this research of vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids and all this research on autism that is there. And then you look at it and like, I could not believe it. Like, I spent so much time on that chapter. I had to go back and work and read Paul Offit's book and read Peter Hutton's book and really, I'm like, what am I missing? Like, there has to be more.
Mm.
You're like, no one's ever done a vaccinated versus unvaccinated retrospective study with the data that we already have.
Nope.
Like that it's insane that does not exist. And the only one that kind of does now is the Henry Ford, which was, still there's all these things around that. But like, where is that? Like, why has that not been done? You want to talk about silencing someone like Secretary Kennedy, just do that. And they're not stupid at the CDC or Paul Offit's not stupid. He's a brilliant guy, or all these people that are super pro-vax, brilliant. Obviously, they thought, hey, let's look at the database that we have and let's see what vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids have. They never thought to do that study. Come on. And that's what I want to ask them, like Mr. Offit, why did you guys not run that study? Like, you had the VST, where is that data? Why didn't you do it? Like, you obviously, if you're trying to prove this, where is that? Like, Dr. Patel's younger, so probably wouldn't really be involved in that. But like, well, where is that study? Like, you talk to all these people, why aren't they doing this? Like, let's get Harvard to like run that study. Do it however you want to do it. Just show people how you do it.
You're much better at giving people the benefit of the doubt because you continue to say, like, I don't think it's nefarious. And I just do. I think that there is
Yeah.
a reason behind them not wanting, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope that one day we get this study and they're like, look, we just never made it a priority. Or, maybe they come out and they say, like, we were afraid of what we were going to find, but we're glad that we did it. And I don't know. I just think that there's a reason that they haven't run it. And I really am looking forward to the day that we do have this vax versus unvaxxed child type
I
of
mean,
study.
we have the Henry Ford study now, right? And
Yeah.
and you see what that says. And I don't know if you've seen the documentary, but
Mhm.
we heard what that researcher said, and I think that's what it is. I think that people ran the data many times, and they get something that they don't like, and they don't want to be the one who has their career destroyed. And like, that guy seems like a very nice guy, and like, he's had a long career as an infectious disease doctor, a super prominent dude
Yeah.
who was not afraid of controversy. Like, this is a guy who was a whistleblower with Flint, Michigan water, and like did a hydroxychloroquine study in COVID and got lots of crap for that, and still refused to publish this study. And it wasn't because the data was bad, and it wasn't because Henry Ford silenced it or whatever. He just didn't want to do it. Like, it's very obvious when you watch that film and you get that hidden camera footage, which is like really useful because it's kind of what I thought was happening. But to get to actually see someone, you're like, oh man, I feel bad for this guy. Because like,
Yeah.
that if he publishes that, his career is done and he's going to be dealing with this forever. And they're going to pick it apart and see what's wrong with the study and whatever. And like, that was like, at least to me, it's one of the best studies ever been done on as a retrospective.
Hmm.
And obviously there are issues with it, but those are the same issues you would always have with this. And he tried to control for the things that you would try to control for better than the other studies that are published. So I don't see where the terrible study part of it is, but I do see this guy who's just basically like, look, I just want to finish my career. I don't want to be the guy who like publishes a study that shows that vaccines and then I have to deal with that the rest of my career. Like, that's not what I'm doing. And I think that's probably what has happened with the data. That's the only thing that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't want to be conspiratorial because I don't want to say something because I don't think you need to. I don't think you need to be conspiratorial on this. I think we need to be driven by the facts, and the facts are it doesn't exist, and that's all that we need to discuss. It doesn't exist, so we should go get it. And I don't care what was done in the past. I don't care who did or didn't, if they ran it or they didn't run it. Like, it doesn't matter really. What matters is that you actually do it now. And I hope that because we can talk about it now, then this will start happening. And maybe some people will run the data, or maybe Kennedy will make it happen. He was going to push it, but even he's not the right guy to do it, unfortunately, because then as soon as he does it, it's like, oh, it's Kennedy or whatever. He's anti-vax. So,
Yeah.
it's like, it needs to be like the team at Harvard or something, like, hey, look, we did this and it's totally not what we expected to find. Like, what do we do now? That would be really useful for science. Ultimately,
Yeah.
you can't. I mean, Kennedy's probably going to do it, but then ultimately, whatever they find, they're going to just say it's biased, which isn't helpful. As
Hmm.
much as something like a Henry Ford study would be, where it's like, well, we really thought we were not going to find problems, but we did. well, now let's redo this study and like let's study it 10 more times and let's see, because maybe the study does have problems. I don't know, like maybe they did something wrong, maybe their data is bad, maybe the kids are unvaccinated or just they're unvaccinated because they're not getting data because they're not even, they leave, like they're not part of the system anymore. So that's possible, but you should take that data and say like, look, this is a pretty strong signal. Let's do it again. Let's do it again at Kaiser. Let's do it again at Harvard. Let's do it again in England. Let's do it again in Denmark. Let's do 20 studies. Let's look at this. Okay, what do those show? Oh, they all show that vaccines are causing more issues than not. Okay, well, that's a problem. Now we got to study it forward to see if that's true or not. Like, that's what we have to do. That's what science is. Or you do 10 more studies, like, no, the signal's not actually there. If you controlled for this, then it's gone. Okay, that's good. Like, that's what you want. Nobody's saying that one study proves anything, but it proves that people are not publishing the results because they're afraid. That's what it proves. And that shows you only have one side of the information. And that's why we are here today, because we don't have the other side. And if we did, then we would have better answers. And I think people would either be super comfortable getting vaccines, or we would have changes to the vaccine program to make it safer. And instead of people just fearing publishing the research, I think they're just afraid to even look.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Okay. The documentary you're talking about is The Inconvenient Truth. Is that right? Yeah. It was just published. We'll link that in the show notes for you guys. Okay. What do we know about SIDS and vaccines?
Yeah, SIDS is a complicated one because, that's so charged, but ultimately SIDS rates have come down a lot in the last, several decades. So I think if you are looking at SIDS in comparison to all the other conditions, the argument is, well, chronic disease is going up because vaccines have increased, but SIDS has gone down dramatically since the Back to Sleep campaign. So it doesn't hold up for that, which to me, presuming that the definition hasn't changed, which is argument. So there's a lot of other side things that like you have to like look at, but presuming that you just kind of leave what SIDS is versus then and now and what it's called then and now, there's a lot less SIDS than there used to be. So therefore, it seems less likely that vaccines would be the primary driver of that, given that it's gone down so much. I have read several articles on it that say, well, it's been reclassified to other things, it's called other things. So that makes it really hard, because that could then, factor in, you could say, well, then it could then be vaccines if you've just reclassified it to something else and it's not actually SIDS anymore. So that's where it's a little complicated, but at least based on SIDS being SIDS, then you would have to say it's gone down. So at least to me, that's not a clear pathway. Maybe some part of SIDS is related to vaccines. Maybe it's some subset, happens sometimes. I'm sure it does, like any disease, any medication could cause a problem. So I don't see why it couldn't, but it doesn't seem to be the primary driver. And then there's always people that comment on the VAERS data and, oh, well, this much, like 70% of SIDS cases happen around the time of vaccine. But that doesn't hold with VAERS data, because people only report things if they think it's related. So you're going to have a lot more reports around a vaccine to VAERS because you're thinking about a vaccine. So like, imagine if your kid dies the day after you get a vaccine, you're pretty likely to think, oh, that might be related to the vaccine, I'm going to report it. But if your kid dies 30 days away, you may not be thinking it's anything to do with the vaccine. So you're not going to necessarily report it to VAERS. But it doesn't mean a whole bunch of kids don't die 30 days from now. They're just not reporting it to VAERS. So that research to me is not as clear as it would be on a prospective trial, which you would need. And the better research in general shows not a huge difference with timing of vaccines, and generally doesn't show any increase. And SIDS is easier to study than some of the other things, because obviously it's like a severe thing and it's really imminent, and it's only in the first couple months. So I think we have better data on it than almost anything else. So I'm still not saying that it couldn't cause it, but I think that a lot of SIDS is related to other things, and that's why we've seen it decrease so much. And less so with vaccines, just given how much has gone down in comparison to all the other things which have skyrocketed. You would think SIDS would have skyrocketed as well if it was related to vaccines, which it hasn't.
I had Dr. Greer Kirschenbaum on the show, and she's the founder of the Nurture Revolution, and I had her on to talk about sleeping close with our baby. So we talked about co-sleeping, we talked about bed sharing, and we talked about room sharing, and we talked about the data behind, the good, the bad, how it is construed, misconstrued. And she talked specifically about something that I did not know, and it was that when we look at SIDS in a lot of the studies, they don't differentiate between true SIDS versus ASSB. And for anyone listening, that is accidental strangulation and suffocation in bed. And so it all kind of gets lumped in with SIDS. And so when we look at true SIDS, there are deeper questions that haven't been answered yet because we don't do a great job of filtering out ASSB and it's all kind of lumped in, which was super interesting for me to learn. I had just never, I guess I had never looked into it. The SIDS is just so scary and it's very real. It's obviously rare, but it is, it's something that's on every new parent's mind, I think.
Yeah, it is. And again, I just go back to this is such a severe, it's such an important thing. I mean, obviously, a kid
Mm-hmm.
it's like the worst possible thing. So we shouldn't rule out vaccines. Like that's just simple. Like it
Yeah.
should be on the list of things, and that's it. I don't think we should assume that it is, but I don't think we should count it out, and we should continue to study it. And I think there's a lot of nuance. This is very complicated, just like you said, because it's so based on the who's diagnosing it and what you call it and what you document it. Because I mean, SIDS is literally like sudden infant death syndrome, like it's death that you don't know the cause. So everyone's kind of gonna write that differently. And
Mm-hmm.
what we know is causing things has changed a lot over the years. We're much better at diagnosing things for sure now than 50 years ago. So a lot of stuff that might have been called SIDS before might not be called SIDS now because we have an answer to that. But it also doesn't mean that that death still didn't have anything to do with a vaccine. Like you could label a death a heart attack, right? But it could still be from a vaccine that caused that heart attack, right? Let's just like example, right? So, we all like know about myocarditis, right? So imagine a person dies from that. You could label it as myocarditis, but it still could be ultimately the myocarditis was caused by the vaccine, right? And so if you're talking about SIDS, if you have a heart attack that you know is a heart attack, you're not going to label it as SIDS. You're going to label it as a heart attack. So the better that we get at diagnosing those kind of things, the less it's going to be caused from SIDS. But maybe that still could be related to a vaccine potentially. So I think that's why it's so complicated because it depends how you define SIDS and what you label and how good those people are. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's super complicated. But I just think ultimately we should be considering vaccines too. With that, I think it's a very plausible mechanism to me that you're giving kids a bunch of vaccines and the next day something happens, or maybe it's vaccine plus the kid gets sick, or vaccine plus they're super susceptible. Yeah, maybe it's not the vaccine, but it's like the mixture of things that just pushes a kid over the edge or affects their heart, or I don't know, like maybe you injected it into a vein or an artery and they get more load. It's who knows. I don't know. Like maybe that's why we don't know what SIDS is, because it does something to you that we can't even study, and maybe that's just 5% of SIDS. But again, that's what we should be studying to try to minimize, because we shouldn't care that it's from a vaccine. We should care that we're trying to minimize SIDS from anything, whether
Yeah.
it's a vaccine, medication, a toxin, the way that they sleep. I don't care. Like again, we're not trying to get more kids vaccinated. We're trying to get healthier kids. So
Yeah.
ultimately, you shouldn't rule out something that you're doing around the time when a kid has sudden infant death syndrome. It should just be part of the discussion, and we should always be thinking about it because maybe there's a mechanism we haven't even explored yet.
What about aluminum in vaccines? So we've got a lot of, vaccine skeptics that say aluminum shouldn't be used, and then you have I think the mainstream medical people who say like aluminum is necessary. It has to be in vaccines. And then you've got people who are part of the R&D teams for vaccines who say there's actually not a lot in vaccines that actually get injected to you. They're more like adjuvants and it's used for the R&D, but a lot of it is filtered out. Then you have the camp that says, well, even breast milk has aluminum in it. So what do we need to know about aluminum in vaccines?
Yeah, I would say it's the most controversial ingredient at the moment. I think it's the thing that most people are concerned about, and there's finally, I think, more discussion on it. It's not unreasonable in my mind to be concerned about aluminum.
Totally.
We're worried about metals. We've always been. You go back to lead. We weren't worried about lead, and then we were worried about lead, and then we're like, now you shouldn't have any lead because it's bad. And then we were not worried about mercury, and you could just drink it, and it was fine. And then we're like, oh, you probably shouldn't have mercury. And then we realized there's mercury in vaccines, and then we took it out of vaccines, and whether it caused an issue or not is still debatable. But they took it out cautionarily. But I don't know that I want mercury in vaccines, even though it's a different one than that's in fish. But either way, still probably want it. And now there's aluminum in vaccines. So the argument for mainstream medicine is the same as it always is it's a small amount and it doesn't cause an issue and you shouldn't be worried about it. I don't know. It doesn't sit right with me totally. I mean, it is true that it's very little, right? It's a very small amount compared to what you ingest. That's for sure true. It's been studied to some degree, but we're giving a lot more vaccines with a lot more aluminum cumulatively. So I don't think we have the research quite like that. I don't think the logic flows in my mind that orally ingesting something is exactly the same as injecting something, and it's injecting in a mixture of other things. So that's not to say that it can't be detoxified or it isn't, but it's not the same evolutionary mechanism we've always had of because yes, there's aluminum everywhere and we are ingesting it, but your body's evolved for that. And not necessarily evolved for injecting it into your muscle and then dealing with that. It doesn't mean it can't, but I just think that when you are injecting something, it's a different mechanism. So why, again, if you could just walk by a peanut for some people and have anaphylaxis, couldn't you inject a little bit of aluminum? And for some people, that couldn't cause a serious reaction, couldn't go to your brain, couldn't cause brain inflammation, couldn't cause inflammation in your heart, whatever. If it just goes to the wrong place or gets dealt with in not the best way, I don't see why that couldn't cause an issue. Sometimes it probably doesn't. Most of the time, it is a very small amount, and your body can handle it in general based on what we think we know. But yeah, I just don't think it's an unreasonable question, reasonable fear, and I think it's something that we should be continuing to study, given that it does benefit the vaccines. It does help them work. So that's why it's in there. And then they work much better because of that. They can use a lot lower of an amount of antigen because it stimulates your body to actually do an immune response. If without it in there, it might not actually stimulate immune response. So the vaccine might not work. So that's why it's in there. Like it helps and it does work. But then the question becomes, okay, does it cause a problem? If it does, how often? And then if it does cause a problem, are there other alternatives that we could use that are safer? And until you can ask those questions, until you don't just say, oh, it's just safe, don't worry about it, it's just a small amount, well, then you can't find alternatives. And maybe there are alternatives that will work just as well, that are safer, that aren't a metal, that our body can handle better. And there are other things that are being studied and are somewhat used in other vaccines, not so much in the childhood vaccines, but even in some of the adult vaccines. Because I have been asked this before and I looked it up and I didn't, I don't know too much about it, but there are other adjuvants that are used and they have like weird names, but chemical names, but they're out there. And maybe those could be studied and they're safer and we could use them. So it's not like just because you got rid of aluminum there couldn't be vaccines, but they're not tested. And once again, it goes back to, okay, what the companies have no reason to do this, right? Like if they can't be sued, and let's say aluminum is the problem, if they were able to be sued, they might have changed them a long time ago. If aluminum was the issue, if they found that, and they'd be like, oh, let's use like CYP 17, 14. I'm just making up a thing, right? Like, let's use this other adjuvant. It works just as well. Why would they go and spend billions of dollars to study this to see if they could find a safer alternative? One, it proves that there's a problem, and two, then they have to do all this research and change it. Like, why would they do that? So unless we identify that aluminum is a problem, then you can go back to them and say, well, we're not getting your vaccines anymore unless you change it. But they're not going to do that. And who's making them do that? So no one's studying them that way. So it doesn't mean that aluminum causes a problem, but it does mean we don't really know. And when people say, oh, no, it's safe, it's been studied, like, really? Like, I don't know, man. I've looked. I can't say that I've seen like this strong body of research looking at all these kids with no aluminum versus aluminum. Again, we haven't studied vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids. So how do you know? Like, most of the research is in animals. And even that's not like super clear that it couldn't cause problems. And some of the animal research shows that it goes to the brain and other places. So again, it's like, what do we really know? Like, we say that we know, but are we saying that we know, or are we saying it hasn't been proven to cause a problem, therefore it doesn't cause a problem? That's what I think most of vaccine research really is. It has not been proven to be a problem, therefore it is not a problem.
Which is not the same.
Not the same. It's the answer is I don't know. I don't know. I haven't seen it cause a problem. It's a very different answer than it does not cause a problem. And when you hear Plotkin, Edwards, all these mainstream doctors on the stand talking about these things, that is their answer. Their answer is, we don't have any research to show that it causes a problem. That's why I'm saying this. But that's not what they say. They say, when you ask them on the news or whatever, it doesn't cause a problem. We know that it's safe. It's been studied. It's not the same thing. And that's not actually what the data shows. And it's not what they say under oath. So I don't know. That's just what I've heard and what I've seen. And so I just think that, again, it's like these people should be questioned about these things and they should be pushed harder on those subjects, but only really Aaron's theory has pushed them, and only when they're on the stand. And his job is not to like get them to expand on this information. It's to, prove his case, and people need to debate and discuss those answers. Yeah. And I've never heard it pushed ever. I've never once heard any of these people be like, okay, well, you said this, but okay, what do you mean? Like, what you said this here, but like, this is what you're saying when you're on the stand. So which one is it? We know which one it is. Okay, so why are you saying this then? Like, why does the CDC website say this when it's not proven? Like that needs to be out in the open so it can be changed, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. Oh my gosh, I have really enjoyed this conversation. And I have just one last question, and it is about a brand new vaccine. And it's because I keep getting a bunch of questions about it, and I don't know how to direct people, and I don't know how to support people other than like, look into it. Here are the inserts and ask your pediatrician about it, which most people are like, I did ask my pediatrician and they didn't give me an answer that I wanted to hear. They refused to actually have a conversation with me. That is about the new RSV vaccine. So it's brand new. We've got a lot of skepticism around it. Rightfully so, right? It's new. We now kind of have a better understanding as a society about the lack of research that goes into vaccines. And I think a lot of people are really skeptical about how fast it hit the market. And they're saying that it is safe in pregnant people, although we've never truly studied it because, again, and we've got this question of ethics there. What do we need to know about the RSV vaccine since we are headed into sixth season? And this is something that obviously all families are kind of having this discussion with their healthcare team, whether you're pregnant or you have a new baby.
Yeah, RSV is interesting because of the diseases that you see as a pediatrician, if you're seeing something bad, it is often RSV. Like RSV does actually cause a good chunk of serious disease. And when you're working in the hospital, you see a lot of kids with severe respiratory issues from RSV. But you have to understand that into perspective of how many kids get RSV. Basically, every kid gets RSV before they're two. Almost all kids are fine, right? So
Okay.
most kids have a cold. It's maybe not a great cold, but they're okay. But if a kid gets really sick with a respiratory disease, it is often RSV. So you do see it. There are a lot of cases. There aren't too many deaths from RSV. It's on the lower end for deaths, but there certainly are a lot of kids that go to the hospital every year for RSV and need extra support and oxygen to get over it because it inflames the lungs. And that's really the big issue with it. So if you were to give a newborn a vaccine, RSV is one of the ones that you would consider and would make a lot of sense, I would say, in terms of all the vaccines that we have. It's certainly way up there in terms of
Okay.
the disease which you actually see and actually could be deadly or severe. So I don't think it's unreasonable to consider having an RSV vaccine if it worked really well. I think that you have to realize that RSV is not a vaccine in the classic sense. It's an immunization. You're giving antibodies. You're not actually vaccinating them. So a vaccine, by definition, you're supposed to be stimulating the body to create an immune response. So that way you can protect in the future. You're not doing that with RSV. RSV, you're giving them the antibodies. It's passive. It's like breast milk, basically. You're giving them basically a medication, and it gives you the antibodies that circulate in your body for a couple of months, and that protects you. So if you do get RSV, then you have those antibodies in your system, which is why it only works for a couple of months, as opposed to a vaccine, which theoretically, is supposed to last for life or last,
Hmm.
ideally if you're getting it. So it's not a vaccine, it's an immunization, but it's kind of lumped under it because it's similar and it's injected. So most people think of it in that way. It's from what we've seen thus far, and again, it's like this is data from the companies, but it's pretty effective. It's not like super duper effective, but 70-90% reduction in hospitalization. So it's pretty good. Again, there's not that many deaths, so it doesn't really reduce death all that much because there isn't much death to begin with. So in the trials, it doesn't really reduce death because there aren't like a lot of kids dying of RSV, but that's not the only issue that we deal with RSV. So that's just something to understand. The long-term risk, we haven't seen much in the way of long-term risk. It doesn't, again, it's more like a medication. So it seems a little safer in theory, but it hasn't been long enough to really know. And certainly, again, we have no idea because it's just in the soup of getting all these other vaccines that we kind of have no idea how that's affecting you long term. But I was also very skeptical, still am, just given the timing of when it came out. And they were always trying to get an RSV vaccine and they never did. And then it kind of came out on the heels of COVID when everyone was worried about diseases. And so they were like, oh, let's get this out now. And the trial data was fine, but not like amazing.
Not
Uh,
robust. Yeah.
and it wasn't like this is a super good vaccine that's like really reducing your risk. And again, like the risk, like absolute risk of serious disease is very low, considering basically every kid gets RSV, but how many kids are in the hospital? It's not many. So you're talking like millions and millions of kids get RSV. A few go to the hospital, very small amount will die. So it's a real benefit, but not a huge benefit from severe disease. So that's just something you have to weigh with a new vaccine. And also if you're getting it during pregnancy, you have to weigh preterm birth, which is really the main concern around the RSV vaccines and has always been. And most of the trials that looked at RSV vaccines had major concerns around preterm birth. And that's
Wow.
why it was never hit the market. And then even in the studies that they found with the ones that are on the market, they still found signals, but just wasn't bad enough, I guess, to be a full concern. And the same thing with the new one that is at the market from Merck. There was a whole big thing from Robert Malone and ACIP because they just started on ACIP. They were just presented this new Merck version of the RSV vaccine. It was shown to them to be safe, so they voted it in. And then like a few weeks later, they like had more time to do more research, and they looked into it and like, oh, you didn't show us all the data. You combine these things, it looks like it's more of a risk. And so it's really very, I don't know, it's very interesting to kind of go through that. But again, like the RSV vaccine, I think works. I think it does protect you. I think RSV can be very severe. I think of the things you get when you're a newborn, it's right up there amongst vitamin K. I think it's more important than Hep B.
Okay.
If you're weighing the two, I think Hep B, unless your mom has Hep B, the risk is low. But to do a new vaccine, I think it's always good to be skeptical. If you want, you have to decide if you want how long you want to wait, how much data do you want, and are we going to ever get the data that you would want to make that decision? Not super easy. To me, I would probably not get it during pregnancy. That's me personally. I would give it to the baby, but I just think doing things during pregnancy is so complicated, and the research is so nuanced and oftentimes not really done as well. So if I was going to choose between the two, that's what I would choose. But I don't know. I think it's a really tough decision, and I think still most people don't do it, but a lot of people are doing it because RSV is severe. So I don't know. It's not simple, but I would say of the things that you can get when you're young, vitamin K can be really helpful, and RSV could certainly be really helpful. Whereas Hep B, unless you have Hep B, is not doing anything. If you're weighing between those, like I would pick RSV over Hep B personally, unless I had
Yeah.
Hep B.
Yeah. And then if your child does get
Okay.
RSV and you're hospitalized, what does that medical treatment look like?
Mostly there's not that much to, so you mostly would be getting oxygen. So it's supporting
Okay.
their breathing. In general, I mean, if you have a pneumonia, you might get antibiotics. It may be steroids if you're having a lot of lung inflammation, and that's kind of the main thing. So usually it's more supportive because it's a virus, so there's not a lot you could do. You could give antivirals, but not really for RSV. So it's usually just more supportive.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, like worst case scenario, or like a respirator, and you need a tube in your throat and you're breathing. But that's like worst case scenario. Most kids, it's just they need a little extra support. But it also depends how young you are. Like the concern really, for the most part, is the really young baby. So if a baby gets RSV like the first month or 2 months, then that's a pretty high risk they're going to have severe disease. Versus if you're 1.5 or 2, it's possible, but just not that likely
And when is it recommended to give an RSV vaccine to a newborn?
right away.
Really, at birth?
So it's another one you can get in the first couple of days.
Okay. All right.
So the recommendations for RSV are anytime in the first 8 months during RSV season. So you're starting in October
Okay.
until March or whatever. So if you're born in that time, you could get in the hospital, you can get at your first visit with the pediatrician, or if you were born before, but then it entered to RSV season. So let's say you were born in, I don't know, June, you could get it in October for the first year if you're younger than 8 months, unless you have severe so if you have like lung issues, lung concerns, you could still get it after 8 months. But generally for a healthy kid, you don't need it after 8 months.
Got it. Got it. Oh my gosh, Dr. Joel, you have no idea how much I enjoy our conversations. Not only is it like so stimulating for my brain, but I feel very safe with you. I love the way that we are able to kind of mentally spar, and I love the way that we're able to sit in that discomfort and have these conversations that I think so many people are really longing for. And I know I said this in the last episode that I had you, but I just want to say thank you so much. And I just want to share my gratitude for you always being so transparent and being willing to go there on the topics that a lot of people just aren't willing to go there. And these are the conversations that I think are going to bridge the gap between healthcare and our nation again. And so I know that that's your goal. That's my goal. I want families to be able to have a trusted relationship with their healthcare providers. And I think right now we're just in a really bad space, and I'm hoping to mend some of that, but it's going to take work on both sides. And I really appreciate you. And, during this conversation, I had this like that's so Raven moment where I kind of envisioned you and I and a couple other people sitting on a committee for the White House, and we're able to have these respectful conversations and really move the needle forward when it comes to public health in our nation in a really respectful way, but one that is challenging of the system to say we're not trying to take you down and we're not interested in punitive measures, but we just want a healthier nation and safer alternatives. And we want to have a conversation that you have shied away from for so long. And we want to meet you where you're at and have this conversation. So that's my dream world. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to leave our community with today?
I mean, I just say congratulations,
Oh,
and
thank you.
we didn't mention that, but we got right off topic into vaccines. But thank you for having me on. And I mean, this is why I reached out, because I listened and I was like, oh, you had really good conversations, and it was really
Thank you.
one of the better things I've heard in vaccines. I mean, there's just no one's really done what you've done, and venturing, even just talking to Dr. Patel. I mean, it's not like it's not crazy. It's like he's such a nice guy, he's so
Yeah.
smart. It's like there's no reason why you couldn't have conversations, and we couldn't have these kind of conversations, and we should. And I'm hoping that the more of these that we have, the more it's going to trickle into mainstream, the more times I can talk to, air quotes, mainstream doctors, which has started to happen. And
Yep.
nobody's gotten in a fight, and no, there hasn't been yelling, and we've been totally fine, and it's been okay. This is fine. Like, I don't have, it's fine. We can do it. Like, I'm happy to talk and debate with anybody on vaccines, because I don't care what the outcome is. Like, it's just to talk.
Yeah.
But I hope that some of those individuals will have those discussions and will sit down at the White House. And I agree with you. Like, that is the ultimate, or on Joe Rogan, or on whatever platform they want to do it, or Huberman or whatever. Like, somebody needs to like take the reins and like get some people on that want to debate and do it respectfully. But it has to be on like a big stage where people can watch it. But the individuals that are very pro-vaccine seem to never want to do it. And I hope that they will be willing to do it in the future. And I think that will move the needle. And I hope that the more of these conversations that are listened to, the more that people are like, well, yeah, we could have a conversation. We could do it. It doesn't have to end the world. Like, it's okay. It's just a vaccine. It's not a religion, even though, that's why Aaron Sears' book's so good. It's not a religion. It's just a medical product. And I don't know. We're on the same team. So anyways, thank you for doing it. That's why I reached out. I thought it was going to be good. And this was super good. This was great conversation. So I appreciate that. And thank you for having me on again.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome back on the show anytime. All right, Dr. Joel, before we leave, can you tell us a little bit about your book and where people can find you, where they can connect with you, and how people can learn more from you?
Sure. So you can find me on Instagram or X at Dr. Joel Gator, or the book is Between a Shot and a Hard Place. You can get it, Amazon, all the normal places, or theshotbook.com. Or if you want, on Substack. That's been a lot of fun on Substack, chatting about vaccines, and it's doing great, and a lot of people love it. So it's pretty surprising to see how much that's grown. It's like the number one many times on health, which is cool. So on Substack, it's also called Between a Shot and a Hard Place, if you want to dive into the controversial topics that you can have on Substack, but not always on mainstream media, though you can have it here now, which is good.
Yeah. All right, you guys, I will see you in the next episode. Be sure to follow Dr. Joel on social media, and you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe and at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm HeHe, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.